Forget the bespoke suits and the dramatic slow-motion walks through rain-slicked streets. Your romanticized image of a Peaky Blinder dies the moment you inhale. Because your first visceral greeting in this supposedly glamorous world isn't a confident handshake or the glint of a razor. It's the pervasive, clinging, utterly inescapable stench. A symphony of human misery that assaults your nostrils the moment you open your eyes. This isn't the faint, exotic musk of a sophisticated old-world city. This is the raw, unadulterated reek of poverty, industry, and neglect. You're talking the metallic tang of perpetually damp coal smoke, the sour, cloying sweetness of human waste seeping from overflowing privies, and the persistent, gag-inducing aroma of unwashed bodies, yours included. Every breath you take is a gritty cocktail of soot, stale sweat, rancid food, and the faint, unsettling whiff of illness. Dream of crisp linen? Ha! Your reality smells like a perpetually damp dog blanket soaked in industrial solvent and existential dread. And trust us, it only gets worse from here. You wake, or rather you surface, from a sleep that offered little respite. The air itself feels heavy, a tangible presence coating your throat and lungs. This isn't just Birmingham. This is Smog City. Population you. Outside your cramped, damp dwelling, the sun is a theoretical concept, perpetually obscured by a thick, greasy pall of coal smoke belching from hundreds of factory chimneys. That picturesque fog you saw in the cinematic shots. That's lung-clogging, corrosive particulate matter. Every inhale is a micro-abrasion, and every exhale is a faint, hacking cough you share with 90% of the population. Your pristine white shirt from your former life would be a charcoal canvas within an hour, and your hair, well, let's just say ash blonde is the new natural. Whether you like it or not, this isn't a temporary inconvenience, it's the very fabric of your existence. Your teeth feel perpetually gritty, your eyes sting, and the inside of your nose is a monument to industrial residue. Forget clean air initiatives or air purifiers. Your personal air filter is your own suffering respiratory system, slowly but surely turning you into a prime candidate for consumption. If you think a little grime adds character, wait until you feel it settling deep in your chest, solidifying your future appointment with a Victorian-era coffin. But if the air you breathe is slowly suffocating you, just wait until you consider the skin you're living in. Let's talk hygiene, or the hilarious lack thereof. That immaculately coiffed hair and those sharp suits? Pure fantasy. Your body is a biological playground for every single uninvited guest you can imagine. Lice aren't a possibility. They're a certainty. They are your constant companions. A tiny, scuttling army, colonizing your scalp, your clothes, and your very soul. The itching is relentless, a maddening, pervasive sensation that drives you to scratch until your skin is raw and bleeding. And those open sores? They're not from a knife fight. They're from your own desperate fingernails, providing convenient entry points for the plethora of bacteria thriving in this urban cesspool. A proper bath is a luxury reserved for the truly wealthy, and even then, it's likely in water that's seen better days. You're lucky to get a basin of lukewarm, gray water once a week, if that. Consequently, the smell of stale sweat, unwashed skin, and festering wounds is not just around you. It's on you. It's of you. And it carries consequences far beyond a few uncomfortable stares. This constant, pervasive filth is a breeding ground for every disease known to man and several newly invented ones. Tuberculosis isn't a plot device. It's the Grim Reaper making house calls to every other home on your street, with typhoid and cholera hot on its heels, just waiting for the next rain-swollen gutter to overflow. There's no hydrocortisone for that rash, no antibiotic for that infection. Your body is a ticking time bomb of potential illness, and the only doctor in town is a prayer you likely won't get around to saying. Now let's nourish that rapidly deteriorating body. Forget the gourmet meals and fine spirits you imagine. Your diet is less farm to table and more scraps to stomach if you're lucky. Food here isn't about pleasure or sustenance. It's about survival. A grim daily calculus of calories versus cash. Your daily intake consists largely of thin, watery gruel, perhaps some stale bread, and if you're truly blessed, a piece of gristly, low-grade meat that might have seen a better week, let alone a better day. Malnutrition isn't a theory. It's a living, breathing reality etched onto the sunken eyes and gaunt cheekbones of everyone around you. Your teeth ache from the lack of vitamins, your bones feel brittle, and a constant dull ache of hunger gnaws at your gut. Think of your modern diet of organic produce and protein shakes. Now imagine a world where the idea of a fresh vegetable is a cruel joke, and anything resembling a balanced meal is an unattainable fantasy. This isn't just about feeling hungry. It's about your body constantly being on the verge of breaking down, your immune system running on fumes, and your mind dulled by an incessant, low-grade starvation. Every meal is a gamble. Will it fill you, or will it give you a gut-wrenching case of the trots from whatever dubious ingredients went into it? Your stomach is perpetually complaining, and the thought of a truly satisfying, clean meal is a distant, agonizing dream. You might look sharp, but inside, your organs are practically throwing a hunger strike, just waiting for the inevitable. But even if you could afford a feast, where would you even eat it without choking on the stench of your surroundings? And what about your home? Forget the sprawling Shelby estate with its roaring fires and polished wood. Your sanctuary is likely a single, cramped room in a tenement building, shared with several other family members, possibly including an invalid aunt and a perpetually crying infant. Privacy? That's a concept for poets and lunatics. Your walls are thin, paper thin, allowing every cough, every argument, every creak and groan from your neighbors to penetrate your meager space. The air inside is stale, damp, and heavy with the combined exhalations of too many people in too small an area, mixing with the ever-present outdoor stench. Your bed is a lumpy mattress, probably infested with fleas and bedbugs that offer you no rest, just another layer of itching torment. In winter, the cold seeps through the rickety windows and thin walls, chilling you to the bone, making sleep an act of shivering endurance. In summer, the heat is stifling, a humid, oppressive blanket that offers no escape. There's no running water inside. A shared pump in the alley is your source, and a communal outhouse, a literal pit of despair, serves as your bathroom. Your home is not a place of comfort or refuge. It's a box, a damp, noisy, pest-ridden box where survival is the only objective, and escape is an abstract dream. This squalid existence is your foundation, the very bedrock of your glamorous life as a gangland legend. And from this foundation of filth, you're supposed to build an empire. Good luck, because the business you're about to engage in is just as grimy, dangerous, and utterly devoid of anything resembling romance. All right, let's leave the comfort of your filthy, lice-ridden bed and step into the sparkling world of your career. Forget the clever schemes, the strategic chess moves, the grand visions of empire. Your first day on the job as a Peaky Blinder doesn't involve a boardroom or even a dimly lit back room where master plans are whispered. No, your initiation is far more immediate, far more grimy, and far less intellectual. Your introduction to the family business is the sickening thud of a fist against bone, the taste of stale blood in your mouth, and the desperate guttural scream of someone who just realized their last shilling is now yours. You are not a criminal mastermind. You are not a strategic genius, and your business acumen amounts to precisely one thing: the ability to inflict pain and inspire terror. You're a glorified street thug, and your product is fear. Welcome to the real hustle, where the only profit margin that matters is the amount of misery you can extract before someone does the exact same thing to you. Your primary income stream isn't from insider trading or complex financial derivatives. It's from shaking down the very people struggling just as much as you are. Congratulations. You're now an expert in extortion. Your daily routine involves strolling into a grimy corner shop, a desperate pub, or a struggling market stall, and politely explaining to the owner, who probably hasn't eaten a full meal in days, that a portion of their meager earnings now belongs to the family. This isn't a negotiation, it's a threat, delivered with the subtle implication of what will happen if they don't comply. You get to watch the fear flicker in their eyes, the slump of their shoulders, the defeated sigh as they hand over money that should have bought food for their children. It's a soul-crushing, repetitive grind, devoid of any thrill. There's no strategic brilliance to it, no intricate planning, just the raw application of brute force and intimidation against the most vulnerable. And when they can't pay, then your job gets truly unpleasant. You're not collecting a debt, you're delivering a message, usually with a brick, a broken window, or a fractured limb. This isn't business smarts, it's common thuggery, and it paints a target on your back almost as big as the one on your victim's face. If you think this is glamorous, wait until you realize how many enemies you're making. Not just the competition, but the very people you're supposedly protecting. Beyond the daily shakedowns, your next big venture is the thrilling world of illegal gambling. Forget the high-stakes poker tables of Monte Carlo. Your office is a grimy backroom, a muddy field, or the dimly lit corner of a pub, filled with the stench of cheap ale, stale tobacco, and desperation. You're not managing a hedge fund. You're taking bets on horse races where the horses are often doctored, the jockeys bribed, and the outcomes are less about skill and more about who paid whom the most. Your clients are not sophisticated investors. They're working-class blokes blowing their week's wages, hoping for a miracle that rarely comes. Your job involves collecting cash, scribbling figures on scraps of paper, and then dealing with the inevitable fallout when someone loses everything and tries to cheat you, or worse, fights you for their lost coin. The tension isn't the electric hum of a stock exchange. It's the volatile, explosive potential of men pushed to their absolute limits by poverty and bad luck. Every transaction is a risk. You're constantly on edge, watching for cheats, for angry losers, and most of all, for the sudden, unwelcome appearance of the police. Because unlike the fancy criminals you read about, your office has no escape routes, no hidden vaults, and certainly no legal protection. Get caught, and you're off to His Majesty's pleasure, which in this era means a very unpleasant, very public, and very painful stay. So much for diversification in your portfolio. But financial woes are only one headache. Sometimes the simplest disagreement leads to the bloodiest outcomes. Your negotiating skills often involve the brutal ballet of a street brawl. Forget the choreographed fights in the movies where everyone lands a clean punch and then dramatically collapses. Real fights are ugly, messy, and terrifying. You're not throwing elegant jabs, you're swinging wildly, desperately, trying to land a crippling blow while avoiding one yourself. The ground is often mud, cobblestones, or worse, raw sewage. Your opponents aren't gentlemen, they're desperate men, armed with whatever they can find. A brick, a broken bottle, a sharpened piece of metal. You'll stumble, you'll fall, you'll be kicked when you're down. The sounds are sickening. The wet thud of bone on bone, the sharp crack of wood, the guttural grunts of exertion and pain. You'll leave covered in mud, someone else's blood, and probably a few new injuries of your own. A broken nose is a good day. A shattered hand, a permanent limp, lost teeth. Those are the standard operating expenses of your profession. And there's no fancy hospital to patch you up afterwards, no clean stitches or painkillers. You get a swig of questionable whiskey and maybe a dirty rag wrapped around the wound. These aren't glorious battles for territory. They're drunken, chaotic, brutal skirmishes that leave you bruised, battered, and constantly nursing new aches. Every fight chips away at your body, leaving you a little more broken, a little more scarred, and a lot more likely to end up in an early grave. And it's not just the rival gangs you have to worry about. There's another force constantly lurking, ready to spoil your day. And then there's the constant gnawing fear. Forget the swagger and the untouchable aura. Every single moment of your life as a Peaky Blinder is lived under the dark shadow of dread. On one hand, there's the long arm of the law. The police in this era aren't just a nuisance, they are a genuinely terrifying, often corrupt, and relentlessly violent force. They don't care about your rights. They care about keeping the peace, which usually means breaking heads and making examples. A sudden raid, a tip-off from an informant, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time can land you in a jail cell. Or worse, in a dark alley with a truncheon to your skull. No Miranda rights, no due process. Just a swift, brutal end to your freedom. And if you somehow evade the police, you still have your competition. Rival gangs. These aren't just business rivals, they're blood enemies. Every street corner, every pub, every gambling den is a potential ambush. A meeting could turn into a massacre, a quiet drink into a knife fight. You learn to scan every face, to distrust every stranger, to sleep with one eye open. Paranoia becomes your closest companion, whispering in your ear, making you question every loyalty, every alliance. You are never truly safe, never truly at peace. Your life is a constant, exhausting game of cat and mouse, where you are often both at the same time. The crown of being a Peaky Blinder might look shiny from afar, but up close it's a heavy, brutal weight that crushes your spirit and leaves you perpetually looking over your shoulder. And this constant fear isn't just about survival, it warps your very soul, preparing you for the kind of power that will consume you from the inside out. You craved power, didn't you? You saw the slick suits, the confident stride, the deferential nods and thought, that's the life. You imagined yourself making the big decisions, controlling the streets, a king in your grimy castle. Well, congratulations, you've achieved it. You've clawed your way to the top of the Birmingham underworld. And your reward? A crown woven from razor blades, a target painted squarely on your back, and a one-way ticket to a lifetime of soul-crushing paranoia. Your throne isn't a plush armchair, it's a perpetually hot seat, and every single soul around you, from your closest kin to the lowliest street runner, is a potential assassin, an informant, or a desperate fool ready to stab you in the back for a sliver of your ill-gotten glory. This isn't empire building. It's a slow, agonizing descent into a self-made hell where peace is a myth and trust is a dangerous delusion. And the first lesson you learn? Power doesn't protect you. It simply makes you a more visible, more desirable target. Your elevated status as a leader doesn't come with a pension plan or paid sick leave. It comes with the grim realization that you are now everyone's favorite bullseye. Every rival gang leader with an ounce of ambition, and there are plenty, all just as desperate and ruthless as you once were, sees you as the next rung on their bloody ladder. They're watching your movements, studying your habits, looking for that single moment of weakness to exploit. A quiet walk through an alley can become an ambush. A drink in a supposedly safe pub can turn into a hail of bullets. But it's not just the external threats that keep you awake at night. The police, bless their corrupt, brutal hearts, aren't after some abstract crime wave. They're after you. Your name is a trophy, your capture a promotion. They'll plant evidence, beat confessions out of innocence, and unleash snitches in your ranks like rabid dogs, all to get to you. And let's not forget the vengeful, the displaced, the victims of your previous business acumen. Every single person you've extorted, every family you've ruined, every man you've broken, they are all out there, simmering with a quiet, seething rage, just waiting for their chance to deliver a dose of grim, poetic justice. You are not a respected figure, you are a resented figure. And resentment, dear friend, is a much more potent motivator than admiration. Good luck enjoying that expensive whiskey when every sip tastes faintly of cyanide. The true cost of your power isn't measured in money. It's measured in the currency of absolute, soul-destroying mistrust. Forget the romantic notion of a band of brothers united by common purpose. You are constantly, relentlessly, and utterly alone. Every smile is a potential mask for envy. Every agreement is a fragile truce, ready to shatter into 1,000 pieces the moment a better offer comes along or a weakness is perceived. You can't delegate. You have to scrutinize. You can't relax. You have to anticipate. Your own family, the very people you're supposedly protecting, are often the most dangerous. They know your secrets, your weaknesses, your history. And in this brutal game, blood is thicker than water until a better opportunity presents itself. You become an expert in reading micro-expressions, in detecting the slightest flicker of hesitation, the faintest tremor of greed. Your brain is a supercomputer running constant betrayal simulations, trying to calculate who will crack, who will turn, who will sell you out for a few extra quid or a plea bargain, in that charming family loyalty you admire from afar. It's a chain forged in shared trauma and mutual vulnerability, not love. It's a pragmatic alliance based on the knowledge that if one of you falls, you all fall. It's a constant psychological warfare, where every hand extended is either a lifeline or a noose. And this pervasive paranoia, this inability to truly connect, will strip away your humanity, leaving you hollow and isolated. So, you've got the empire, but can you ever truly enjoy a moment of peace when your mind is a perpetual battlefield? This isn't just mental strain, this is psychological warfare waged upon yourself, by yourself. The constant need to be 10 steps ahead, to anticipate every betrayal, every ambush, every police raid, exacts an unbearable toll. Sleep becomes a luxury you rarely afford, and when it does come, it's plagued by nightmares. The screams of the trenches, the faces of those you've killed, the fear in the eyes of those you've extorted. Your mind is a perpetual motion machine, planning, strategizing, calculating risks, until you're utterly exhausted, yet unable to rest. The stress manifests physically, a perpetual tension in your jaw, a dull ache behind your eyes, a nervous twitch you can't control. You self-medicate, of course. Copious amounts of whiskey, probably a bit of opium to dull the edges, maybe even a sniff of cocaine if you're really desperate for a moment of clarity that inevitably leads to more manic strategizing. But these are just temporary fixes, band-aids on a gaping wound. They don't offer true relief. They simply deepen the hole you're digging. Your body is a prison for your tormented mind, and there's no escape. You're constantly wired, constantly agitated, constantly on the brink of snapping. This isn't a path to power. It's a direct route to a mental breakdown, slowly but surely, eroding your sanity until you're just a shell of the man you once were, haunted by the ghosts of your own making. And the relentless pressure never truly eases. Because let's be brutally honest, for someone like you, someone in your position, there is no happy ending. The romantic narrative of escaping to a quiet life, settling down with your loot, and growing old gracefully simply doesn't exist. Your options are stark, brutal, and few. A violent death in a back alley, a bullet to the head from a rival, a knife in the gut from a disgruntled associate, or the hangman's noose at His Majesty's pleasure. Or, if you're lucky, a lifetime wasting away in a dark, damp prison cell, slowly going mad, forgotten by the very world you tried to conquer. The concept of retirement is a ludicrous joke. You are in until you are out, permanently. Every successful score, every vanquished enemy, every expansion of your empire simply raises the stakes, paints a brighter target, and shortens the fuse on your inevitable demise. There's no escaping the game, you are the game. And the game always claims its players. The only thing left to determine is how spectacular, or how pathetic, your final act will be. You might think you're building a legacy, but you're actually just building your own tomb, brick by bloody brick. And as your empire grows, you realize the only thing you truly own is a ticket to a brutal, unceremonious end. But if power truly corrupts, what does that do to the very concept of family? All right, let's pull back the curtain on the most insidious myth of all, the family loyalty of the Peaky Blinders. You see the strong bonds, the shared glances, the family-first mantra, and think, Finally, a place of belonging, a fortress of love in a cruel world? Wrong. Your blood isn't a bond of affection. It's a non-negotiable contract written in the ink of shared trauma and the lead of poverty, binding you to a life you never chose. This isn't a family. It's a codependent, violently dysfunctional corporation, and you're an unwilling, unpaid employee whose job description includes suffering, lying, and occasionally dying for the quarterly profit margin. The warmth you think you see? That's just the heat from the constant, barely suppressed fires of resentment, ambition, and barely contained rage simmering beneath the surface. Welcome to the embrace of the Shelbys, where the only thing thicker than blood is the tension. Your initiation into this family wasn't a heartwarming ceremony. It was simply the immutable fact of your birth. You were born into this, and there is no opting out. Forget witness protection programs or disappearing to a quiet farm upstate. The moment you are a Shelby, you are a Shelby until you are in the ground, or possibly a very unpleasant prison cell. To try and leave is not merely frowned upon. It is an act of unforgivable treason, met with the full, merciless force of the very people who claim to love you. Your desires, your dreams, your aspirations for a life beyond the smog and the violence are utterly irrelevant. Your purpose is predefined, your path set. You are a cog in the machine, a soldier in their endless bloody war. Any attempt to forge your own path is met with emotional blackmail, veiled threats, and the chilling reminder of what happens to those who betray the family. It's a gilded cage, built not with bars, but with obligations, fear, and the deeply ingrained pathological need to belong to something, no matter how toxic. This isn't a choice, it's a life sentence, and the warden is your own flesh and blood. You are trapped, inextricably linked to their fate, whether you like it or not. And within this so-called family, the concept of unconditional love is a laughable absurdity. Your relationships aren't built on affection, they're built on cold, calculating transactional utility and relentless emotional manipulation. Every interaction is a delicate dance of power, a constant assessment of who can be used for what, and how much leverage you can exert. Your vulnerabilities are not met with comfort, but seized upon as tools. Your fears are not assuaged, but exploited to ensure your compliance. That heartfelt plea for help, it's likely just a setup for a trap. That seemingly genuine moment of affection, it's probably a calculated move to lower your guard before they ask you to do something utterly monstrous. There's no safe space to be truly honest, no shoulder to cry on without the risk of that tear being used against you later. Your loved ones are your greatest assets, and therefore, your greatest liabilities. They know your secrets, your history, the skeletons in your personal closet, and they will, without hesitation, weaponize that knowledge if it serves the greater family good, which, conveniently, usually aligns with their own personal gain. Your childhood trauma isn't something to heal. It's a lever to push you into another dangerous task. Congratulations! You're not just a family member, you're a strategic resource, and your emotional well-being is a mere line item on a ledger of acceptable losses. The supposed unity of the family is nothing but a thin veneer over a boiling cauldron of sibling rivalry, deep-seated resentment, and the constant threat of internal betrayal. Those family meetings aren't about consensus or shared vision. They're battlegrounds, tense showdowns where agendas clash, old wounds are meticulously picked open, and every compromise is a temporary armistice. The air crackles with unspoken grudges, the sharp bite of sarcastic remarks, and the heavy silence that follows a barely veiled threat. Someone is always angling for more power, always questioning leadership, always ready to stab a metaphorical or literal knife into a sibling's back if it means a step up the ladder. These aren't just squabbles. These are internecine wars, fought with words that sting like acid and actions that leave permanent scars. Think of your own family Thanksgiving, amplified by 100, with actual stakes like life, death, and control of a criminal empire. The tension is so thick you could carve it with a razor. And what about trust? You can't even trust your own flesh and blood not to sell you out, either for a perceived advantage or out of simple, corrosive envy. Every loyal Shelby is a potential Judas, and you, dear family member, are always on the lookout for the next kiss of betrayal. Living like this, with a constant sense of being observed, judged, and potentially undermined by those closest to you, erodes any sense of security and leaves you perpetually on edge. Ultimately, belonging to this family means sacrificing every shred of your individual identity and personal happiness for the business. Your dreams? Put them on hold indefinitely, or better yet, forget them entirely. Your personal relationships? They are either co-opted into the criminal enterprise, used as pawns, or destroyed by the endless demands of the family. There's no space for a quiet, fulfilling life. You are not pursuing joy, you are pursuing survival, power, and the expansion of the Shelby influence, regardless of the personal cost. Every decision, every action, every waking moment is dictated by the needs of the family, and those needs are insatiable. Your mental health deteriorates under the constant pressure, your personal ethics are warped, and your very soul is slowly chipped away, all in the service of a collective entity that rarely, if ever, gives anything back that truly nourishes you. This isn't just an unpaid internship, it's a lifelong indenture, and the currency of your payment is your freedom, your peace of mind, and the very essence of who you are. The family promises protection and power, but delivers only a different kind of prison, where you're bound by blood and the bitter taste of shattered dreams. You might have the family name, but you'll never truly have yourself. And if your relationships are this twisted, imagine what passes for leisure in this brutal world and the tragic price you pay for even a moment of forgetfulness. All right, you've survived the filth, the brutal business, and the soul-crushing dysfunction of your family. Now finally, a moment to unwind, to escape, to find some solace in the dark corners of Birmingham. Forget cozy nights by a fireplace, intellectually stimulating conversations, or genuine moments of tender romance. Your idea of leisure, in this world, is a desperate self-destructive plunge into the abyss, a frantic scramble for any sensation that can momentarily dull the relentless pain of your existence. Your pleasure is a chemical hallucination, your love a transactional arrangement, and your freedom a fleeting moment of artificial oblivion. This isn't recreation, it's self-immolation, fueled by cheap whiskey, potent drugs, and the ever-present, gnawing certainty that true happiness is a myth sold to suckers. Welcome to your downtime, where the only thing you truly escape is sobriety. Let's be blunt. Your primary form of relaxation is a deep, desperate dive into alcoholism and drug addiction. That stylish cigarette dangling from your lips? It's rarely just tobacco. The whiskey you sip so nonchalantly? It's not a sophisticated digestive. It's a brutal anesthetic, numbing the constant dread and the gnawing guilt. You drink until the edges blur, until the screams of the trenches fade, until the faces of your victims are no longer quite so vivid. And when alcohol isn't enough, there are other, more potent escapes. Opium dens, where the thick, sweet smoke promises blissful oblivion, a temporary vacation from your tormented mind. Or perhaps a snort of cocaine, providing a manic burst of energy and false confidence, only to drop you into a deeper, more agonizing pit of despair. These aren't recreational choices. They are a desperate, pathological form of self-medication, a race against your own sanity. Your liver is a battlefield, your lungs a tar pit, and your brain a chemical soup, constantly craving the next hit, the next moment of artificial peace. There are no recovery programs, no compassionate therapists, no support groups, just the next bottle, the next pipe, the next endless spiral. You're not enjoying yourself, You're simply postponing the inevitable crash, the brutal hangover, the profound emptiness that follows every fleeting high. And if you think a little chemical escape is bad, wait until you explore your romantic options. And what about love? Forget the sweeping declarations, the tender touches, the genuine connection of two souls intertwined. In your world, love is a transaction, a convenience, or a cruel illusion that will inevitably lead to betrayal and heartbreak. If you're fortunate enough to find someone who genuinely cares for you, they will inevitably become a pawn in the endless power games, a target for your enemies, or a casualty of your own reckless life. Most relationships are purely transactional, prostitutes in smoke-filled back rooms, brief, passionless encounters fueled by desperation and a momentary craving for human touch. Or perhaps you'll find someone who sees your power as a meal ticket, a means to escape their own squalor, using you just as coldly as you use others. There's no trust, no vulnerability, no true intimacy. How could there be when your life is built on deceit and violence? Every romantic gesture feels tainted, every whispered promise rings hollow. You learn to expect betrayal, to anticipate loss, to protect yourself by never truly letting anyone in. Your heart, like your body, is scarred, armored against genuine connection. The very idea of a healthy, lasting relationship is an alien concept, a naive fantasy that belongs in some other, less brutal world. Even if you love someone, you'll inevitably drag them down into your personal hell, or worse, become the instrument of their suffering. And the consequences of these shattered relationships are often far more devastating than a broken heart. Your idea of a night out isn't a friendly gathering. It's a desperate gamble for fleeting moments of distraction, often culminating in violence. The pubs are not cozy community hubs. They are volatile cauldrons of simmering tension, where a misplaced word, a spilled drink, or a lingering stare can ignite into a full-blown brawl. Your entertainment is often watching a dogfight in a muddy pit, betting on illegal bare-knuckle boxing matches where men are maimed for pennies, or engaging in casual, petty criminality for kicks. The air is thick with smoke, the reek of stale ale, and the palpable desperation of men seeking any escape from their dreary lives. There's no sophisticated entertainment, no art, no culture to uplift your spirit. Just crude, often cruel, diversions that reflect the brutality of your everyday existence. Your leisure time is just another arena for your suppressed aggression and self-destructive tendencies. And even these moments of fun are fraught with peril. A rival gang could be lurking. The police could raid at any moment, or a cheated gambler could seek violent revenge. Your downtime is merely a continuation of the same struggle, just with more alcohol and less purpose. You're never truly relaxed, never truly safe. Every laugh is forced, every smile a brittle facade. And even if you manage to avoid a punch-up, there's always the specter of your past, haunting your every move. Because no matter how much whiskey you drink, no matter how much opium you smoke, you can never truly escape the crushing weight of your own conscience and the relentless march of your unseen wounds. The horrors you've witnessed, the atrocities you've committed, the lives you've irrevocably damaged, they don't simply vanish with the morning light. They fester, they gnaw, they transform into a silent internal torment. You are haunted by the faces of the dead, the screams of your victims, the chilling memories of the trenches. This isn't just about PTSD. It's about a fundamental erosion of your soul. You are a walking wound, a man-shaped collection of scars, both visible and invisible. Your leisure activities are merely elaborate, desperate attempts to outrun your own mind, to drown out the echoes of your past, to silence the critical voice that reminds you of who and what you've become. But the silence never truly comes. It's just a temporary lull before the next wave of flashbacks, the next bout of insomnia, the next terrifying nightmare. You're trapped within your own head, a prisoner of your own brutal history, and no amount of external distraction, No amount of chemical oblivion can ever truly set you free. And this internal torment, this unseen battlefield, is perhaps the cruelest hangover of all, a constant reminder of the true price of your supposed power. You thought the bullets stopped flying when the armistice was signed, didn't you? You imagined leaving the mud, the screams, and the constant bone-chilling fear of the trenches behind, stepping back into a world that had forgotten the visceral horror. You were wrong. The First World War didn't end for you when you took off your uniform. It simply moved its bloody battlefield from the Somme to the shattered landscape of your own mind. Every waking moment is a struggle, every night a fresh descent into the hell you thought you'd escaped. You are not a criminal mastermind. You are a survivor of an unspeakable meat grinder, a walking, breathing testament to psychological trauma. And every sharp suit and clever scheme is merely a desperate attempt to outrun the echoes of the trenches that thunder perpetually in your skull. Welcome to your true, unending war. The official term was shell shock, a quaint, utterly inadequate phrase for the profound, irreversible fracturing of your very soul. Forget the dramatic, cinematic flashbacks that neatly present themselves. Your reality is a constant, unpredictable barrage of intrusive memories, night terrors, and sudden, debilitating panic attacks that strike without warning. The smell of a burning coal fire can instantly transport you back to the stench of burning flesh. A sudden, loud noise can send you diving for cover, convinced you're under artillery fire. The quiet click of a closing door becomes the ominous cocking of a rifle. You live in a state of hypervigilance, your nerves perpetually frayed, your body tense, ready to spring into action even when there's no visible threat. Sleep is not a restful escape, but a deeper plunge into the nightmare. You wake up soaked in sweat, heart pounding, the screams of dying comrades still echoing in your ears, the mud and blood of the battlefield still clinging to your phantom limbs. There's no therapist to help you process your trauma, no support groups for veterans with PTSD. You're simply mad or nervy or told to pull yourself together. Your mind is a prison, built brick by bloody brick from the horrors you witnessed, and there is no parole. This invisible war wages ceaselessly within you, and it determines every single move you make. How do you cope with a mind that's constantly replaying the horrors of Verdun or the Somme? You don't. You try to drown it, numb it, or outrun it through self-destructive excess. That seemingly casual cigarette habit? It's a nervous twitch, a desperate attempt to slow your racing thoughts. The copious amounts of whiskey you consume? It's your self-prescribed medication, the only thing that offers a few hours of blessed oblivion from the relentless internal torment. You drink until your liver screams, until your words slur, until the world finally blurs into a merciful, temporary haze. And when whiskey isn't enough, you turn to stronger fare. Opium, a sweet, cloying escape that promises a dreamless sleep. Or cocaine, offering a manic, unsustainable burst of energy that makes you feel powerful, invincible, anything but the broken man you truly are. Your gambling isn't for thrill. It's a desperate chase for a distraction, a brief moment where the adrenaline of the bet overshadows the internal screams. Every one of these pleasures is a slow, agonizing form of self-poisoning, a futile attempt to silence the ghosts that refuse to rest. You're not living. You're existing on the edge, constantly seeking the next fix, the next moment of artificial peace, knowing full well it will only deepen the hole you're digging. And society, oblivious to your internal struggle, offers no helping hand. The world you returned to after the war largely didn't understand, or didn't care to understand, your invisible wounds. Society expected you to man up, to get over it, to simply reintegrate into a life that no longer felt real. Your profound changes, your emotional numbness, your sudden outbursts of rage, your inability to connect, were met with fear, judgment, or dismissive apathy. Families often didn't know how to deal with the shell-shocked soldier who came home a stranger. They expected the son or husband who left, not the haunted, volatile phantom who returned. This lack of understanding forces you deeper into isolation. The only people who truly get it are other veterans, other broken men who carry the same silent burdens. You gravitate towards them, forming a grim camaraderie born not of shared joy, but of shared horror. This creates a toxic echo chamber, reinforcing your trauma and normalizing the very coping mechanisms that are destroying you. There's no compassionate ear, no professional guidance, just a general societal pressure to bury your pain deep down, where it can fester and turn into something truly destructive. You are a pariah in a world that sent you to hell and then expected you to return unscathed. This unending internal war manifests in every aspect of your life, transforming you into a person you barely recognize. Your emotional landscape becomes a barren wasteland. Love, joy, empathy. These feelings are dulled, replaced by a pervasive numbness. You struggle to form healthy relationships, constantly pushing people away, unable to truly open up or trust. Your natural state is one of irritability and aggression, a hair-trigger temper that can explode at the slightest provocation. This isn't just about being a tough guy, it's about a total breakdown of your emotional regulation. Violence, which was once a tool of survival, becomes your default language, a familiar response to any form of stress or discomfort. And for some, the burden becomes too heavy to bear. The constant suffering, the lack of hope, the inability to escape their own minds, it leads them to seek a more permanent solution, to finally silence the ghosts and end their own story. You witness it, or you feel the temptation yourself. The concept of a future, of a happy, peaceful existence, is utterly alien to you. You live day to day, often minute to minute, simply surviving, perpetually caught in the brutal wake of a war that, for you, never truly ended. So, there you have it. The real story behind the glamorous life of a Peaky Blinder. It's not about sharp suits and cunning plans. It's about the perpetual stench of poverty, the constant gnawing of hunger, the relentless itch of lice, and the slow, agonizing crawl of disease. It's about dirty, brutal street fights, shaking down the desperate and the constant, chilling fear of both the police and your bloodthirsty rivals. It's about power that grants you nothing but paranoia, isolation, and a bullseye on your back. It's about family that binds you in chains of duty and uses your every vulnerability against you, destroying any hope of genuine connection. And it's about leisure that amounts to self-poisoning with cheap whiskey and drugs, fleeting moments of oblivion purchased at the cost of your very soul. Most of all, it's about the silent, unending war you wage within yourself, a prisoner of the trenches, haunted by nightmares, forever broken by the unspeakable horrors you survived. The romanticized image, it's a carefully constructed lie. This isn't a life of power and prestige. It's a slow, agonizing death of the spirit, a relentless grind that leaves you hollow, scarred, and utterly devoid of peace. You are not a king. You are a walking wound, a cog in a machine built of suffering, and your only guaranteed reward is a bitter, unceremonious end. So, tell us again, do you really want to be a Peaky Blinder? Or does the modern world, with its clean sheets, readily available antibiotics, and therapists who actually listen, suddenly seem like a much more appealing proposition? Think about it. The choice is yours. All right, buckle up. This isn't your grandma's scenic ocean cruise, and there won't be any charming Yelp reviews waiting for you back on shore. Forget your GPS. Here, true north is often just away from where the captain's glare falls. We're not just stepping onto a ship. We're boarding a living, breathing, groaning beast of wood and iron, saturated with human ambition, despair, and a deeply questionable hygiene regimen. Welcome to the Golden Age of Piracy, and specifically to the chaotic heart of a pirate vessel. your first step onto the swaying gangplank is less an act of boarding and more a full-body commitment to a world designed by chaos and sustained by sheer, desperate will. The planks beneath your feet are not merely wood. They are a living, creaking, groaning testament to 1,000 storms and as many spilled libations. They whisper tales of untold voyages and unwashed souls. No amount of prior warning prepares you for the immediate, overwhelming assault on every single one of your senses. This isn't just a place. It's an experience that aggressively introduces itself. The air itself hits you first. Less a gentle breeze and more a dense, palpable wall. It's a rich, unholy stew of everything that has ever existed within these wooden confines. There's the sharp, metallic tang of salt water, cut through by the sweet, sickly undertone of stale rum that seems to have seeped into every fiber of the ship's being. Beneath that, a primal funk, the earthy musk of unwashed bodies, the pungent aroma of sweat that has dried and re-dried in the sun, mingling with something vaguely, disturbingly putrid. Perhaps the contents of a bilge, perhaps just the lingering essence of a particularly unfortunate meal. Then, an overlay of damp, mildewed canvas, a hint of scorching tar from hurried repairs, and the deep, resonant scent of old working wood, not the clean, polished kind, but wood that has known the embrace of countless waves and the grind of relentless labor. It's a scent that clings to your clothes, seeps into your skin, and promises to follow you long after you've disembarked, a constant, malodorous reminder of where you've been. But the olfactory assault is merely the curtain raiser. The real character of this place is a symphony of discord, a relentless auditory tapestry woven from the very fabric of maritime mayhem. The ship groans, a deep, resonant rumble that isn't just the timber settling, but sounds like the beast itself, expressing profound existential weariness. Overhead, the masts creak and pop, like the joints of an old giant, stretching after a long nap, each shift a delicate, precarious balance against the relentless pull of the sea. Ropes slap against wood with a rhythmic, percussive thud, accompanied by the higher-pitched whistle of wind whipping through the rigging, a constant mournful song that speaks of endless horizons and forgotten shores. Beneath it all, the omnipresent slosh and gurgle of water, a watery conversation against the hull, occasionally punctuated by the sudden, violent slap of a larger wave against the ship's side, sending tremors through the deck beneath your feet. And then, the human element, the distant guttural shouts of commands, the clanking of metal on metal from some unseen task, the occasional raucous burst of drunken laughter, or the low, tuneless drone of a shanty, warbled by a voice that has clearly seen too many sunrise hangovers. It's a chaotic orchestra, each instrument playing its own tune, yet somehow combining into the definitive sound of a world teetering on the edge. Visually, the ship is a masterpiece of functional disarray. Every line, every angle, seems to be engaged in a subtle argument with gravity and common sense. The deck isn't merely uneven, it undulates, a warped landscape of sun-bleached and salt-stained planks, each one telling a story of wear and tear, splinters and scuffs. Coils of rope lie scattered like sleeping serpents, waiting for the next command. Barrels, once full of fresh water or potent spirits, are now strewn about, some empty, some perhaps still sloshing with questionable contents, their staves stained and scarred. Figures move across this unsteady stage with a peculiar rolling gait, a dance learned from years of constant motion, as if the deck itself is performing a vigorous, unpredictable jig, and they are merely adapting to its whims. Nothing is truly clean, nothing is truly straight, and everything looks like it has been in a long, protracted bar fight and narrowly lost. Even the light, filtered through the flapping sails and the occasional burst of sea spray, seems grimy, a muted, hazy illumination that softens the edges of hardship, but never truly hides them. And then, there's the movement. Oh, the movement. This ship doesn't simply float. It breathes, it lurches, it performs an intricate, unsettling ballet with the ocean itself. The deck isn't just swaying gently, it's a living entity, constantly shifting beneath your feet. One moment, you're pitched forward as the bow dips into a trough. The next, you're flung backward as the stern rises. Then a sudden, jarring roll to port, followed by an equally abrupt lurch to starboard. Your balance, accustomed to solid, unwavering ground, is instantly rendered obsolete. You find yourself bracing, swaying, fighting against the invisible forces that seek to throw you off kilter, a constant, subtle effort that soon becomes a subconscious part of your existence here. It's a dance with gravity that gravity rarely wins, and you, the newcomer, are merely learning the first, awkward steps. This initial sensory assault, this immediate baptism into the ship's raw, unvarnished reality, is merely the opening chord. It's the promise of a deeper, more profound immersion into a floating ecosystem unlike any other. For now, take a breath, if you can manage it, and let the chaos wash over you. The deck beneath your feet, as unsteady as it is the very stage upon which the daily drama of survival, the constant ballet of struggle and makeshift community, truly unfolds. And that, my friend, is where our journey truly begins. From the precarious rhythm you now begin to acquire on the gangplank, your very first full step onto the main deck confirms what your senses have already screamed. This isn't just a surface, it's a living canvas, constantly repainted by sea spray, sun, and the unending parade of human endeavors. It's a stage, warped and worn, where the daily drama of survival plays out in excruciating sensory detail. Here, the very air you breathe is a thick, salty broth, spiced with exertion and the constant threat of the unknown. The deck itself is a masterpiece of gritty improvisation and enduring abuse. Its planks, once grand timbers, are now a patchwork quilt of sun-bleached silver, salt-encrusted brown, and patches of a perpetually damp, dark gray. Each board seems to have its own unique personality, some smooth and polished by 1,000 bare feet, others splintered and defiant, ready to snag an unwary boot or bare toe. The entire surface undulates beneath you, a subtle, ceaseless motion that demands a new kind of balance, turning even the simplest walk into a practiced dance with the whims of the waves. Coils of rope, thick and stiff with salt, lie like slumbering anacondas, waiting for the sudden, urgent command that will bring them snapping to life. Barrels, some filled with fresh water, or at least water that was once fresh, others with powder, and still more with the potent, sour promise of rum, are lashed down with a casual expertise that belies their true weight and danger. Tools, marline spikes, axes, wrenches, lie scattered or are tucked into crevices, looking as much a part of the ship's natural growth as barnacles on the hull. There's a constant film of salt and grime over everything, a persistent residue that speaks to the ocean's relentless embrace, blurring the lines between man, machine, and elemental force. But amidst this chaotic tapestry of utility, the true art of the deck lies in its inhabitants, a constantly shifting cast of characters who have learned to dance with its unpredictable rhythms, their lives inextricably woven into its very fiber. And what a cast it is, the human zoological garden in its working prime. These aren't just men. They are the living cogs in this immense floating machine, each honed by the relentless demands of the sea. You see the grizzled old salt, skin like weathered leather, moving with an economy of motion, his gaze fixed on some distant point, knowing the ship's every groan before it's even begun. There's the younger recruit, still clumsy in his sea legs, struggling with a heavy coil of rope, his face a mask of determined concentration, sweat beading on his brow despite the biting wind. The carpenter, his hands gnarled and powerful, is perpetually at work, hammering at some splintered timber, his grunts of effort a regular percussion in the ship's symphony. The cook, often a figure of weary resignation, lumbers across the deck carrying buckets, leaving a faint, greasy trail in his wake. Their movements are a fluid, practiced sway, a dance ingrained from years of navigating a perpetually unstable floor. Voices are low, often guttural, punctuated by sudden, sharp commands that crack like a whip, instantly obeyed. There's a constant murmur of quiet curses, the rhythmic slap of bare feet on wet wood, and the occasional strained groan as a heavy load is hoisted. It's a community forged in hardship, where communication is often nonverbal, a shared glance, a subtle nod, an unspoken understanding of common misery and purpose. These figures, often indistinguishable in their grime and weariness, are nonetheless individual threads in the mighty loom of the ship, bound together by the towering masts and the very rigging that holds this beast together. Its vast, intricate nervous system. Towering above this bustling stage, piercing the endless sky, are the masts, the very spine of this leviathan. They stand stark against the horizon, immense pillars of wood that seem to reach for the heavens, swaying with a languid grace that belies their immense power. From them, an intricate, almost dizzying labyrinth of ropes, spider webs down to the deck, a fibrous nervous system that connects every part of the ship. These aren't just ropes, they are sheets, halyards, braces, shrouds, each with its own name, its own purpose, and its own constant, taut tension. The air around them is alive with sound. The high-pitched whine of the wind whistling through them, the low hum of their tautness, and the sharp crack as a sail flaps against the breeze. You see the men, looking like spiders, clambering up this vertical world, their figures diminishing with dizzying speed as they ascend. Their skill a terrifying blend of strength and defiance of gravity. A misplaced foot, a frayed line, a moment of inattention, any of these could mean a swift, unforgiving descent into the restless waves below. Yet, for all their vital purpose in propelling the ship, these wooden giants and their fibrous veins also cast long, silent shadows, often falling across the very instruments of violence that give this floating fortress its true bite. Lining the ship's sides, their dark circular mouths a silent, ever-present threat, are the cannons. These are not ornamental pieces. They are the ship's teeth, heavy, dark, and often encrusted with the salt and grime of countless voyages. Their iron surfaces are pockmarked with rust, telling tales of rain and sea spray, but their brutal efficiency is never in doubt. They sit low in their carriages, powerful hunks of metal that exude a latent, simmering power, a silent promise of thunder and destruction. The air around them carries a faint, almost imperceptible scent of old gunpowder, mingling with the metallic tang of iron, a subtle reminder of their purpose. Crewmen move around them with a casual familiarity, leaning against their cold barrels or stepping over their massive wheels as if they were just another piece of furniture. This nonchalance, however, is merely a facade. Every man aboard knows the true meaning of those gaping maws, the sudden, violent roar they can unleash, the devastation they can bring. These metallic behemoths, ever hungry for conflict, represent the stark reality of life on the open sea. But even as they stand ready for battle, the true constant is the endless, relentless expanse of ocean, stretching to a horizon that always promises something new, or something terrifying. And so, your gaze is inevitably drawn to the horizon, that infinite, ever-shifting line where sea meets sky. It's a place of both endless possibility and profound, crushing isolation. At the bow, the lookout stands, a solitary, stoic figure, his silhouette a stark contrast against the vastness, his eyes scanning the seemingly empty expanse for any sign of life, any promise of land, or any whisper of danger. The sky above is a canvas of shifting moods, brilliant, merciless blue one moment, then bruised and ominous with storm clouds the next. The ocean itself transforms, from a playful, sparkling blue to a dark, churning gray, mirroring the unpredictable temperament of this world. There's a profound sense of scale here, a humbling realization of human insignificance against the raw power of nature. The routine of watches, the turning of the hourglass, provides a fragile rhythm, but this rhythm can be shattered at any moment by the cry of "sail ho!" or the sudden, furious descent of a squall. This upper deck, for all its constant activity and visible life, is merely the public face of the ship. The deeper, darker truths of this vessel are often hidden from the sun, residing in the cramped, perpetually damp chambers below decks, where the secrets of survival are truly forged in the shadows, far from the watchful eye of the sky. You've navigated the volatile stage of the upper deck, felt the salt-kissed wind, and observed the dance of men and masts under the indifferent gaze of the sun. But the true, pulsating heart of this wooden beast isn't found beneath the open sky. It resides in the suffocating embrace of its lower decks, in the perpetually damp, dimly lit labyrinth that is its very gut. Here, the air doesn't merely contain smells, it is a smell, thick and visceral, a layered narrative of human existence at its most unvarnished. This is where the ship truly breathes its most fetid breath, and where the line between man and machine blurs into a single, struggling entity. To descend into this subterranean world is to leave behind the last vestiges of fresh air and sunlight, trading them for a deeper, more profound immersion into the ship's raw essence. The gratings, which on deck provided brief glimpses of the hidden world below, now become your gateway. As you step onto the first rung of the ladder, a different kind of sound envelopes you. The distant, muffled groans of the ship's timbers, protesting every wave, every shift, like an ancient slumbering beast troubled by nightmares. The air grows instantly heavier, wetter, and colder, clinging to your skin with a clammy persistence. It's an immediate, chilling reminder that you are moving from the world of the living sky to the damp, dark womb of the vessel. The light, already scarce, filters down in struggling, dusty shafts, barely illuminating the slick, worn steps beneath your hands, steps that feel almost alive with the residue of countless descending feet, the salt, the sweat, the grime of centuries. This descent is not just a change in elevation, it's a journey into the very entrails of the beast, where privacy is a forgotten luxury and every breath carries the taste of existence on the edge. And in this damp, pulsating darkness, you find the crew quarters, less rooms and more glorified stacked cages, known as the berths or 'tween decks. Here, the concept of personal space is a cruel, abstract joke, perhaps muttered with bitter irony in some forgotten port. Imagine a low-ceilinged cavern perpetually swaying, where hammocks hang like cocoons, strung so close together that a man might brush elbows with his neighbor, even in sleep. These are not comfortable resting places. They are slings of canvas, perpetually damp, sometimes stiff with dried sweat and salt, offering little respite from the ship's ceaseless rocking. The air here is a potent brew of humanity, the overpowering musk of unwashed bodies, compounded by the metallic tang of old blood, the sour scent of unemptied chamber pots, or worse, the occasional misfired aim, and the persistent, sweet, sickly aroma of tobacco, stale rum, and unidentifiable organic decay. Personal belongings are scarce, tucked into small, crudely fashioned lockers, or simply stuffed into the corners of hammocks. A worn blanket, a dull knife, a half-empty pouch of tobacco, a tattered letter from a life long gone. There's a constant low murmur of snores, coughs, and the shifting of bodies, a symphony of restless sleep. Yet, despite the pervasive squalor, a strange, resilient intimacy thrives here, a shared camaraderie born of inescapable proximity and common misery. But this tight-knit existence is only one layer of the ship's subterranean secrets. Deeper still, the ship's true digestive system churns in the darkness. Plunging even further into the ship's belly brings you to the truly unspeakable parts, the lower holds and the dreaded bilge. This is where the very essence of the ship's waste management system resides, a place where light utterly surrenders to an inky blackness that seems to absorb all hope. The floor here is often just the top of the cargo, if any, or merely the wet, undulating planks above the bilge water itself. The air is a suffocating blanket of putrefaction, a powerful, almost chemical stench of stagnant water, decaying food, and the reek of unmentionable biological waste that has collected in the ship's lowest reaches. Every breath feels heavy, laden with invisible particulate matter, scratching at your throat. The constant sloshing and gurgling of water from below the floorboards is a ceaseless, unsettling soundtrack, a reminder of the unseen, fetid lake that pulses beneath your feet. Here, in the Stygian gloom, you sense more than you see, the rustle of unseen scuttling things, the high-pitched squeak of a rat, a creature that thrives in this environment, a constant, unwanted companion. The timbers groan louder down here, their tortured cries echoing in the oppressive silence, as if the ship itself is complaining about the putrid contents of its stomach. It's a place designed for storage and suffering, where vital provisions are kept, but also where the desperate and the sick might be confined, their moans lost in the ship's ceaseless lament. And this perpetual damp, this pervasive darkness, this constant motion, it is not merely an environment. It is a force that shapes the very beings who inhabit it, forcing them into a unique rhythm. The crew, confined to these lower decks, develops a profound, almost symbiotic relationship with the ship's ceaseless movement. There is no escaping the lurching, the pitching, the rolling that defines life at sea, but down here, in the suffocating closeness, it becomes an even more intimate dance. Men sleep curled in their hammocks, their bodies swaying in perfect synchronicity with the ship's motion, muscles tense, unconsciously bracing for every sudden shift. They eat, they play cards, they mend clothes, all while their bodies subtly adjust, their center of gravity constantly recalibrating. Walking is less a deliberate act and more a practiced stagger, a fluid sway that allows them to remain upright, even as the floor beneath them seems to betray all laws of physics. Their hands instinctively reach for stanchions, bulkheads, or ropes, their grip a subconscious anchor in this perpetually unstable world. The darkness, too, becomes a familiar companion. Eyes adjust, learning to navigate by the faintest glimmer of a lantern or the almost imperceptible outline of a familiar form. Conversations are often carried out in hushed tones, voices muffled by the surrounding timbers, the words themselves seeming to absorb the dampness and the fatigue of the environment. This constant, unyielding motion, this ceaseless fight against seasickness and claustrophobia, binds them, forging a resilience born of shared discomfort. Yet even in this profound discomfort, one relentless, universally understood craving often manages to cut through the oppressive atmosphere, a primal need that draws all men to a single, chaotic hub of activity, the very heart of the ship's meager provisions and its peculiar culinary rituals. You've emerged from the suffocating intimacy of the lower decks, the scent of damp wool and restless humanity still clinging to you like a second skin. Yet, as you navigate back toward the ship's more active spaces, you're drawn by a new, more primal force, a magnetic pull of heat and a smell so thick you could almost chew on it. You're approaching the galley, but to call it a kitchen would be a grotesque overstatement. This is not a place of culinary art. This is the ship's grumbling, fiery stomach, a cramped, smoke-filled crucible where the grim alchemy of survival is practiced daily. The entrance is less a doorway and more a hole in the bulkhead, perpetually belching a thick, greasy haze. The wave of heat that hits you is immediate and oppressive, a stark contrast to the damp chill of the lower holds. The air is a dense stew of smoke from the sputtering fire, the sharp, metallic tang of boiling salt, and the vaguely sweet, stomach-turning aroma of meat that has been preserved far beyond its natural lifespan. It's a smell that promises not pleasure, but the simple, brutal necessity of fuel for the human machine. Peering inside, you see not a chef, but a silhouette wreathed in smoke and steam, a shadowy figure presiding over a large, bubbling cauldron. This is the ship's cook, often a man deemed unfit for the high-wire act of the rigging, perhaps missing a leg or an eye, and now relegated to the most thankless, yet arguably one of the most critical jobs on board. He is the master of this smoky domain, the grizzled sovereign of sustenance, and you approach his kingdom with a mixture of hope and profound trepidation. His domain is a marvel of dangerous, cramped efficiency. The centerpiece is the firebox, a brick-lined hearth that contains a perpetually angry-looking fire, its hungry flames licking at the base of a massive iron pot. The walls around it are slick, with a dark, sticky film of accumulated grease and soot, a testament to thousands of meals cooked in haste. The very air shimmers with heat, and the constant creaking of the ship's timbers is punctuated here by the hiss and spit of the fire, and the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the cook's cleaver, making short work of something you'd rather not identify. There are no gleaming countertops, no tidy spice racks. There are only scarred wooden boards, a few battered tin plates, and the omnipresent, bubbling cauldron that holds the crew's fate for the day. The cook moves with a surprising grace in this confined space, a territorial animal in its lair, his face a mask of grim concentration. He doesn't cook with love, he cooks with grim necessity, transforming the ship's meager and often unappetizing stores into something that can, at the very least, be swallowed. But what precisely is he working with in that cauldron of despair? The answer lies in the unholy trinity of the pirate diet. First, there is the salted meat. This isn't the tender jerky you might imagine. It is a geological specimen, a slab of beef or pork cured in so much salt that it has become as hard and unyielding as a piece of wood. It arrives in the galley, looking less like food and more like a reddish-brown rock. The cook's first task is to soak it for hours, attempting to leach out the soul-crushing salinity before boiling it into a stringy, chewy submission. Even then, every bite is a powerful reminder of the ocean, a blast of salt that overwhelms any other flavor. Next comes the legendary ship's biscuit, or hardtack. These are not crackers. They are dense, flour and water discs, baked to the consistency of fired brick. They are famously indestructible and almost comically hard, requiring a good dunking in water, ale, or whatever is bubbling in the pot to become even remotely chewable. And yes, the stories are true. Breaking one open often reveals a scurrying ecosystem of weevils, a source of grim amusement and, as the old joke goes, the only fresh meat you're likely to see for months. The men have a saying, "It's better to eat your biscuit in the dark." And then there is the water. The precious fresh water stored in barrels in the hold does not stay fresh for long. Within weeks, it becomes a slimy, stagnant soup, growing a green film and tasting of the wood and whatever else has decided to make a home in it. To make it palatable and to stretch the rum supply, it is mixed to create grog. This mixture of water, rum, and sometimes a bit of lime or lemon juice, if they are lucky, does more than just get a man tipsy. The alcohol kills some of the taste and bacteria, making the foul water drinkable. The daily ration of grog is a sacred ritual, a moment of brief, fiery respite from the drudgery, a liquid warmth that spreads through the chest and temporarily masks the gnawing emptiness. But this monotonous, nutrient-starved diet of salt, starch, and alcohol has a price. It's a slow, creeping cost that begins not in the growling stomach, but in the mouth, a sinister whisper of a curse that haunts every long voyage. You start to notice it in the subtle gestures of the men as they eat. A man gingerly prodding a piece of meat with his tongue, his face wincing not from the taste, but from a deeper pain. Another rubbing his gums, a worried look in his eyes. A general lethargy begins to set in, a profound, bone-deep weariness that has nothing to do with the hard labor. It's a strange tenderness in the gums, a feeling that one's teeth are not as securely anchored as they once were. It's a mysterious ache in the joints, a longing for something fresh, a crisp apple, a juicy orange, anything to cut through the relentless monotony of salt and grease. This is the shadow of scurvy, the slow, insidious decay from within, a direct consequence of this floating world's detachment from the land and its life-giving bounty. The meal, such as it is served. A ladle of grayish, stringy stew is slopped into a wooden bowl, accompanied by a slab of biscuit. The men take their rations and find a place on the deck, eating in a focused, almost grim silence. This is not a social gathering, it is refueling. The food doesn't delight the senses. It merely quiets the desperate gnawing in their bellies for a few more hours. But the hunger that lingers is for more than just calories. It's a hunger for flavor, for health, for a connection to a world that isn't made of groaning wood and endless, unforgiving water. As the men disperse, the galley's fire still sputtering in its hearth, you are reminded that control of this fire, this food, is a form of power. And the ultimate seat of power on this vessel is not in its fiery gut, but on the elevated platform that surveys all, the quarterdeck, where the unwritten laws of this society are enforced and the captain's shadow looms largest. Leaving the greasy haze of the galley behind, you ascend once more, climbing from the ship's churning stomach back towards the open air. But you don't return to the chaotic sprawl of the main deck. Instead, you find yourself drawn to a subtly different domain, the quarterdeck. This is not just another section of the ship. It is a raised platform, a distinct and almost sacred space, usually at the stern. Architecturally, it's only a few feet higher than the rest of the vessel, but in the rigid, unwritten constitution of this floating society, those few feet represent a chasm of authority. This is the ship's brain, its command center, and the stage upon which the delicate, often brutal, theater of power is performed. The very atmosphere here feels different. The air is cleaner, free from the thick, immediate smells of tar and sweat that dominate the main deck. The relentless cacophony of labor is more distant, a muffled backdrop to the sharp, clear snap of the ensign in the wind and the crisp orders of the quartermaster. The planks beneath your feet seem more meticulously maintained, the wood less scarred, the brass fittings of the binnacle housing the compass polished to a dull gleam. It is here that the great ship's wheel stands, a silent, imposing sculpture of wood and iron, the very instrument through which one man's will can be imposed upon this 2,000-ton beast of timber. To stand here is to feel the ship not just as a collection of groaning parts, but as a single, unified entity, its course dictated from this very spot. It's a place of perspective, of control, and of a tension so thick you can almost taste it on the salt spray. And at the heart of this tension is the almost mythical figure who commands it all. The captain is less a man and more a living embodiment of the ship's authority. You may not see him often. He might remain secluded in his cabin for long stretches, a shadowy presence whose influence is felt more than it is seen. But when he emerges onto the quarterdeck, the entire ship seems to hold its breath. He moves with a quiet confidence that sets him apart, his gait steady on the swaying deck, his gaze sweeping over the rigging, the sails, and the men with a practiced, assessing eye. He is not necessarily the strongest or the loudest man on board. In fact, on a pirate vessel, his authority is a fragile, conditional thing, a pact made with the crew. He was elected, and he can be deposed. His power is derived not from divine right, but from his ability to deliver what the crew desires most: plunder, glory, and survival. His every decision, to chase a potential prize, to run from a naval warship, to ration the water, is a high-stakes gamble, and his currency is the crew's continued belief in his competence and his luck. This precarious balance of power creates a constant, simmering undercurrent of scrutiny, but the captain is not the only one wielding influence from this raised stage. Standing as both the captain's right hand and the crew's representative is the quartermaster. If the captain is the ship's absolute monarch during battle, the quartermaster is its cantankerous prime minister, during the long, monotonous days of peace. He is the keeper of the ship's laws, the articles that every man signed upon joining. He is the one who doles out the rations, settles disputes, and inventories the plunder, ensuring every man gets his fair, predetermined share. He is often a man of sharp wit and a sharper tongue, respected for his fairness, but feared for his unyielding adherence to the code. You see him here on the quarterdeck, a ledger in hand, his face a mask of stern calculation as he oversees the distribution of grog or mediates a squabble between two crewmen over a game of cards. He is the buffer between the captain's grand strategy and the crew's daily grievances, a walking, talking embodiment of the delicate social contract that prevents this floating society from descending into pure anarchy. But even his authority has its limits, and the laws he upholds are only as strong as the crew's willingness to abide by them. And in the cramped, miserable conditions of a long voyage, that willingness can be a very fragile thing. The laws of a pirate ship are a fascinating paradox. On one hand, they are brutally democratic. A captain can be voted out of his command, and every man has a say in major decisions. On the other, the punishments for breaking the articles are swift and merciless. A man caught stealing from a shipmate might have his ears and nose slit before being marooned on a desolate island. A deserter in battle faces certain death. These rules are not whispered suggestions. They are the iron framework that holds this society of outcasts together. But laws are only effective when the enforcers are vigilant, and it is here, on the quarterdeck, that you can see the first subtle cracks in the ship's social fabric beginning to form. A whispered conversation that halts abruptly when an officer turns his head. A small group of men, huddled by the rail, their expressions a mixture of resentment and conspiracy. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the way a command is obeyed. A moment's hesitation, a sullen glance. These are the early, almost invisible symptoms of a brewing sickness, one far more dangerous to the ship's hierarchy than any storm. As you stand on this elevated deck, you realize that the greatest danger to this vessel may not come from a naval cannonade or a monstrous wave. It comes from within. It's born in the festering resentment of a crew whose bellies are empty, whose gums are sore, and whose hopes of treasure are fading with every passing day. The captain's authority, so absolute in appearance, is balanced on a knife's edge. One poor decision, one perceived injustice, one long, fruitless stretch of empty ocean, and the whispers in the dark corners of the lower decks can grow into a roar of open defiance. The quarterdeck, for all its polished brass and air of command, is a tinderbox waiting for a spark. And as the voyage wears on, as the rations dwindle and the body weakens, that spark often finds its first tinder not in the heart, but in the flesh, in the grim, inescapable reality of physical decay, a reality most starkly confronted in the ship's most feared and avoided corner. You retreat from the quarterdeck, the silent weight of its authority pressing down on you, the quiet tension of command, the whispered seeds of mutiny. It's a psychological poison that seeps through the ship. But there is a place on this vessel where all pretense of authority, all notions of social hierarchy, are rendered utterly meaningless by a far more immediate and visceral tyrant: pain. You don't need a map to find the surgeon's den. You simply follow the sound, a low, rhythmic moaning that seems to emanate from the very bowels of the ship, a sound that cuts through the creaking of timbers and the distant shouts of the crew. It's a sound that promises no relief, only a prelude to something worse. As you draw closer, a new scent joins the ship's already complex bouquet, a smell that is sharp, medicinal, and deeply, deeply unsettling. It's the acrid tang of vinegar used as a crude disinfectant, layered over the coppery metallic smell of old blood and the sickly sweet, foul odor of infected flesh. This is the olfactory signature of the surgeon's corner, a small, grim space tucked away in a low-ceilinged section of the 'tween decks, as far from the galley's heat and the quarterdeck's order as possible. It is not a room, It is a confession booth for the sins of the flesh, a place the ship itself seems to be trying to forget. The light here is a single, sputtering lantern, swaying with the ship's motion, casting long, dancing shadows that make the small space seem to writhe in agony. Presiding over this domain of suffering is the surgeon himself. Forget any image you have of a learned physician. This man is more likely the ship's carpenter, a man whose primary expertise is in sawing wood, not bone. His hands are thick, calloused, and immensely strong, his face a permanent mask of grim pragmatism. He is not a healer, he is a technician, a man who understands that a limb full of gangrene is no different from a mast riddled with dry rot. Both must be cut away for the whole to survive. He moves with a slow, deliberate calm that is somehow more terrifying than any frantic energy. There is no comfort in his eyes, no gentle bedside manner. There is only the dispassionate gaze of a craftsman assessing a job that needs doing. But it's not the man himself who holds your gaze. It's the tools of his trade, laid out with the grim neatness of an executioner on a stained piece of sailcloth. This is not a collection of surgical instruments. It is an arsenal of brutal efficiency. There is the saw, its serrated edge flecked with rust, its teeth filed sharp, wearing a faint, dark stain that speaks of past amputations. There are probes and hooks of dark, unpolished iron, looking more like instruments of torture than of healing. There is the cauterizing iron, its head shaped into a flat disc, resting cold for now, but promising a future of searing heat and the horrifying sizzle of burning flesh. A collection of large, crude needles and thick, waxed thread lie ready for stitching wounds, the work promising to be more akin to mending a sail than closing skin. And of course, there is the anesthetic, a clay jug of raw, uncut rum, offered not for comfort, but to bring the patient to the very edge of consciousness, or hopefully, just over it. Each tool is a silent promise of screaming, agonizing necessity, a testament to a world where survival is often purchased at the cost of a piece of oneself. And here, in the flickering, greasy light, you see the true face of the voyage's curse. The men waiting their turn are not nursing battlefield wounds. They are the victims of a slower, more insidious enemy. They are the living monuments to scurvy. You see a man with a face pale and bloated, his gums swollen into purple, spongy masses that bleed at the slightest touch, covering his teeth in a grotesque mockery of a smile. His breath is foul, a miasma of decay. Another man sits listlessly, his legs covered in dark, spreading bruises, the ghosts of old injuries returning to haunt his skin. His eyes are sunken, his movements slow and lethargic, as if the very energy has been leached from his bones. They don't complain loudly. Their suffering is too profound, too deep for that. It's a quiet, desperate misery, a slow rotting from the inside out. For scurvy doesn't just rot the body, it corrodes the very soul, leaving behind a hollow shell of the man that once was. You watch as the surgeon beckons one of them forward. The man's jaw is swollen, and he points a trembling finger to his mouth. The surgeon grunts, forces the man's head back, and peers inside. He doesn't offer a diagnosis. He simply reaches for a pair of pliers that look better suited for pulling nails from timber. He offers the jug of rum. The man takes a long, desperate swig, his eyes watering. He is given a small piece of leather to bite down on. The surgeon braces himself, gets a grip, and with a sudden, violent twist, pulls. A muffled, guttural scream is torn from the man's throat, his body convulsing. The tooth, long and blackened at the root, is tossed aside. The surgeon, without a word, retrieves the cauterizing iron from a small brazier of coals, its tip now glowing a dull, menacing red. A hiss, a plume of foul-smelling smoke, and a final, agonized groan. The procedure is over. This is medicine on the high seas. Brutal, swift, and devoid of all mercy. This grim corner of the ship is a microcosm of the entire voyage, a constant, losing battle against decay. The suffering here is personal, intimate, and deeply human. But even this concentrated theater of pain is about to be dwarfed. The slow, internal rot of scurvy and the sharp, localized agony of the surgeon's tools are one form of hell. But another is gathering on the horizon. The very air is beginning to feel heavy, the sky taking on a strange, bruised color. The ship's groans are changing their tune, from a weary complaint to a note of genuine fear. The individual suffering of men is about to become irrelevant, swallowed by the collective, indiscriminate fury of the ocean itself. A new chaos is coming, one that no surgeon can mend and no captain can command. You escape the surgeon's den, the phantom smells of blood and burnt flesh clinging to the inside of your nostrils. But as you emerge onto the deck, you realize the ship has undergone a terrifying transformation. The familiar, rhythmic rocking has been replaced by a violent, unpredictable bucking. The air, once just salty, is now thick, heavy, and eerily still, charged with an electric tension that makes the hairs on your arms stand on end. The sky, once a brilliant, indifferent blue, is now a churning canvas of bruised purple and sickly yellowish green, a sight so unnatural it feels like a personal threat. The symphony of the ship has changed. The creaks have become shrieks. The whistle of wind in the rigging has become a low, guttural moan that promises violence. Every man on deck has stopped what he was doing. All eyes are turned to the horizon, where a wall of impenetrable darkness is advancing with terrifying speed. This isn't just a squall. This is a monster. The captain's voice, for the first time, loses its measured calm and cracks like a whip across the deck. All hands, furl the sails, batten down the hatches. The command shatters the stunned silence, and the deck explodes into a frenzy of organized chaos. The practiced, almost lazy movements of the crew are gone, replaced by a desperate, frantic urgency. Men swarm up the ratlines with the speed of startled spiders, their bodies stark silhouettes against the darkening sky. They fight against sails that are no longer just canvas, but monstrous, thrashing beasts, whipped into a frenzy by the first gusts of the storm. The wind tears at them, trying to rip them from their precarious perches. On deck, men strain against heavy wooden hatch covers, sealing the ship's vulnerable openings against the coming deluge. Ropes are checked, barrels are lashed down with a renewed, desperate strength. The air is filled with the frantic shouts of orders, the thunderous crack of canvas, and the rising, deafening roar of the approaching storm. It is a race against time, a desperate attempt to armor the ship before the first blow lands. And then, it hits. Not as rain, but as a solid wall of wind and water that strikes the ship with the force of a physical blow. The vessel groans, a deep, shuddering cry of pure agony, as it is slammed sideways. A wave, a colossal liquid mountain of dark, churning water, rises up and crashes over the deck, sweeping everything not bolted or lashed down into the churning sea. For a moment, the entire world is a roaring, white chaos of foam and fury. The men, clinging to lifelines, are completely submerged, their desperate gasps for air lost in the maelstrom. The deck, for a terrifying instant, disappears beneath a raging torrent. Then, just as suddenly, the water recedes, leaving behind a deck stripped bare. The men gasping, soaked to the bone, but miraculously still there. The ship, shaking like a terrified animal, rights itself, its timbers screaming in protest. But this was just the first punch. The storm has only just begun its violent embrace. The world is reduced to a primal struggle for survival within a universe of pure, screaming chaos. The distinction between sea and sky dissolves into a single, roaring vortex of wind and water. Rain falls not in drops, but in horizontal sheets, driven by a wind so powerful it feels solid, stinging the skin like 1,000 tiny needles. The roar is constant, a deafening, all-encompassing sound that vibrates through your very bones, making thought impossible. All communication is reduced to frantic hand signals and desperate shouts that are instantly swallowed by the gale. The ship is no longer sailing. It is a helpless cork, thrown about by forces beyond all comprehension. It is lifted to the crest of a mountainous wave, hanging for a terrifying moment in the gray, churning sky, before plunging sickeningly down into a trough so deep it feels like a descent into the abyss. The deck tilts to impossible angles, first one way, then the other, a relentless, violent pendulum that threatens to tear the very soul from your body. In this moment of absolute elemental fury, all social structures, all hierarchies, all resentments dissolve. The captain is just another man clinging to a rope, his face a mask of grim determination, his orders lost to the wind. The surly crewman who was whispering mutiny just hours before is now straining at a line alongside the very officer he despised, their shared struggle erasing all previous grievances. Scurvy is forgotten. Hunger is forgotten. There is only the ship and the storm and the desperate, unified will to live. It is a dance with chaos, a brutal, terrifying ballet where every man is a vital participant. A rope snaps and a mast groans, threatening to splinter. Men rush to secure it, their movements a desperate, instinctual collaboration, a single organism fighting to keep its skeleton intact. A man is nearly washed overboard, and a dozen hands reach out to haul him back, their grip like iron. In the face of annihilation, the crew becomes one. The storm rages for what feels like an eternity. Hours bleed into an endless night of terror. The ship is battered, bruised, and broken. A sail is torn to shreds, its remnants whipping in the wind like ghostly streamers. A section of the railing is splintered and gone. The deck is a wasteland of debris and chillingly empty spaces. But, impossibly, the ship holds. The storm, having spent its fury, finally begins to relent. The wind's roar softens to a wounded howl, the waves shrink from mountains to angry hills, and a sliver of pale, exhausted gray light appears on the horizon. The survivors, battered and utterly spent, lie draped over cannons, slumped against masts, their bodies aching, their minds numb. They have stared into the abyss, and somehow have not fallen in. The ship, their wounded, groaning home, is still afloat. The immediate threat of nature's wrath has passed, but the storm has left behind more than just physical damage. It has left a silence, a shared trauma, and a profound sense of vulnerability. In the calm that follows, the old tensions, temporarily erased by the fight for survival, begin to creep back, but they are changed. The shared ordeal has forged new bonds, but it has also exposed the fragility of their existence, sharpening the desperation that was already simmering beneath the surface. The ordeal has washed the ship clean in some ways, but in the quiet, exhausted aftermath, the old human poisons begin to ferment anew, now with a bitter, renewed urgency. The seeds of discontent, watered by the storm and fertilized by exhaustion, are about to find fertile ground in the hushed conversations of the weary survivors. The storm has passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and utterly exhausted. The sun, when it finally breaks through the bruised clouds, illuminates a scene of quiet devastation. The deck is a graveyard of splintered wood and shredded rope. The ship itself seems to breathe, with a shallow, pained rasp, its every creak and groan, a testament to the beating it has endured. In the eerie calm that follows the chaos, a new kind of silence settles over the crew. It's not the silence of peace, but the heavy, watchful silence of a predator licking its wounds, its eyes scanning for weakness. The shared terror of the storm forged a temporary unity, but now, in its aftermath, that unity frays, replaced by a more insidious and personal brand of discontent. The first whispers are born from exhaustion. The men, their bodies aching and their spirits hollowed out, move about the deck with the slow, shuffling gait of ghosts. They are tasked with the immense labor of repair, but their movements are sluggish, their hearts not in it. The adrenaline of survival has faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a gnawing, bitter resentment. They look at the tattered sails, the splintered masts, the endless, indifferent ocean, and then they look at their hands, raw and bleeding from hauling ropes, and they begin to ask the quiet, dangerous questions. For what? What have we gained? The promised riches feel like a distant, cruel joke. The glory of the pirate life has been replaced by the grim reality of back-breaking labor, empty bellies, and the constant, looming presence of death. The storm didn't just batter the ship, it battered their morale, leaving it as splintered and frayed as the rigging. You see it in the small, clandestine gatherings that begin to form in the shadowed corners of the ship. A group of 3 or 4 men, huddled near the foremast, their heads close together, their voices a low, conspiratorial murmur that is instantly silenced if an officer walks by. Their conversation is a litany of grievances, a toxic brew of fear and frustration. They talk of the dwindling rations, the hardtack that's more weevil than flour, the foul water that turns their stomachs. They complain about the captain's last decision, to ride out the storm instead of running before it. Was it courage, or was it reckless pride? Every decision is now re-examined through a lens of suspicion. The captain, once a figure of decisive authority, is now seen as the architect of their misery. The quartermaster, once the fair arbiter of the rules, is now the tight-fisted guardian of dwindling supplies. The whispers spread like a fever, infecting the weary and the discontented, turning shared hardship into shared blame. The social fabric of the ship begins to visibly unravel. A direct order from the boatswain is met, not with instant obedience, but with a sullen, resentful glare and a moment of defiant hesitation. A card game on the lower decks ends not in drunken laughter, but in a sudden, violent scuffle over a perceived slight, the tension so thick that a single wrong word is enough to ignite it. Loyalty, once the invisible glue holding this society together, begins to fracture. Men form small, tight-knit factions, trusting only those who share their growing sense of betrayal. The ship ceases to be a single entity and becomes a collection of wary, suspicious tribes. The camaraderie forged in the storm dissolves into a paranoid watchfulness. Every shadow holds a potential enemy, every whispered conversation a potential plot. The human zoological garden is no longer just a collection of archetypes. It is a tense ecosystem on the verge of a bloody internal conflict. At the center of this growing storm of discontent, you often find a single, charismatic figure. He is not necessarily the strongest or the most experienced sailor, but he is the one who gives voice to the crew's unspoken anger. He is the master of the half-truth, the sly insinuation, the well-placed rumor. You see him moving from group to group, a sympathetic ear for every complaint, a knowing nod for every grievance. He speaks of a forgotten prize, a safer route, a captain on a nearby ship who is said to be lining his crew's pockets with gold. He fans the flames of resentment, nurturing the seeds of rebellion with carefully chosen words. He doesn't shout his intentions from the masthead. He whispers them in the dark, letting the poison do its own work. He is the patient predator, waiting for the perfect moment to challenge the old lion, knowing that the herd is weak, hungry, and ready for a new leader. The captain and his officers are not blind to this. They can feel the shift in the ship's atmosphere as surely as they can feel a change in the wind. The quarterdeck, once a symbol of undisputed authority, now feels like an isolated fortress under siege. The officers walk with a new stiffness, their hands never far from the pistols tucked into their belts. The captain's gaze, as he surveys the deck, is no longer just assessing the ship's condition. It is searching for signs of disloyalty, trying to distinguish the grumblers from the true conspirators. The unspoken war is waged in stolen glances, in the careful choice of who is assigned to the night watch, in the sudden tense silence that falls when the captain approaches a group of men. The air is thick with the promise of a final, inevitable confrontation. The ship has survived the wrath of the ocean, but the more dangerous storm is the one brewing within the hearts of its own crew. The question is no longer if the dam will break, but when. And as the sun sets, painting the sky in bloody streaks of red and orange, the ship sails on, a tense, floating powder keg, waiting for the spark that will ignite the final, devastating explosion. The tension of the day, a thick, palpable poison, doesn't disappear with the setting sun. It simply changes its form. As night drapes its heavy velvet cloak over the ocean, the ship undergoes another profound transformation. The frantic energy of repair and the simmering heat of rebellion cool, replaced by a deep, resonant quietude. This is the time of the watch, a period of hushed vigilance where the ship and its few waking souls are suspended between the infinite, inky black of the sea and the cold, diamond-studded abyss of the sky. The world shrinks to the gentle glow of a single shielded lantern on the quarterdeck, its feeble light a tiny, defiant spark against the overwhelming darkness. The majority of the crew are below, lost in the heavy, rum-soaked sleep of the utterly exhausted. The ship is manned by a skeleton crew, their movements slow and deliberate. Their voices, when they speak at all, are low and muffled, as if not to wake the slumbering beast beneath their feet. The dominant sound is no longer human. It is the ship itself, speaking in its true, nocturnal voice. The gentle, rhythmic creak of the masts, the soft slap of water against the hull, the whisper of a light breeze through the tattered rigging. It's a lullaby sung by a weary giant. The air is cold and clean, scrubbing the last vestiges of the day's sweat and fear from your lungs. It's a peace so profound, it feels almost holy, a temporary armistice in the war against both nature and themselves. High above, in the crow's nest, the lookout stands his solitary vigil. He is a lonely sentinel at the edge of the known world. Up here, he is utterly alone, a single human soul adrift in a sea of stars. The moon, a cold silver scar in the blackness, casts a ghostly liquid light on the waves, turning the churning sea into a rolling landscape of mercury and shadow. Without the glare of any shore, the night sky reveals its terrifying, magnificent depth. The Milky Way is not a faint smudge. It is a thick, shimmering river of light, a celestial road paved with countless suns. Constellations, sharp and brilliant, wheel slowly overhead in their ancient, silent dance. In the face of such cosmic grandeur, the squabbles and ambitions of the men below seem impossibly small, almost absurd. The lookout's gaze drifts from the empty horizon to the star-dusted heavens, and for a moment, he is not a pirate, not a mutineer or a loyalist. He is just a man, humbled and awed by the sheer, silent scale of creation. Down on the deck, the ship itself seems to be dreaming. It breathes with the slow, deep rhythm of the ocean swells. The muffled coughs and snores from the lower decks are like the murmurings of its own slumber. This is when you can truly feel the vessel as a single, living entity. During the day, it is a machine of war and labor, a chaotic stage for human drama. But at night, it is just a piece of wood and iron, a cradle rocking gently on the breast of the deep, its scars and wounds softened by the greasy moonlight. You find yourself running a hand along the cool, damp wood of the rail, feeling the faint vibrations of the ocean, a connection to the immense, living power that carries you. In this cathedral of silence, the barriers between man, ship, and sea seem to dissolve into a single breathing consciousness, and it is in this profound quiet, in this moment of enforced stillness, that the longing begins to ache. It's a phantom limb, a dull, persistent throb for a world that is no longer theirs. The men on watch, their minds free from the immediate demands of labor, find their thoughts drifting across the endless water. They think of the simple, impossible luxuries of the land, the taste of fresh bread, the feel of solid, unmoving earth beneath their feet, the scent of a wood fire that isn't about to be extinguished by a wave. They remember faces, a wife, a child, a mother, now blurry and ghost-like, their voices lost in the whisper of the wind. This is the pirate's curse, to be free from all laws but a prisoner of the ocean, to have the world as your prize, but no place to truly call home. The longing is a quiet, secret thing, a vulnerability never shown in the harsh light of day, but it is as much a part of this life as the salt and the scurvy. The watch is a time of temporary peace, a brief, melancholic truce with the chaos. But it is only an intermission. The hourglass on the quarterdeck is turned, a silent figure takes the place of another at the helm, and the lonely sentinel in the crow's nest is relieved, descending back into the ship's dark, snoring gut. This fragile tranquility is a borrowed thing, destined to be burned away by the rising sun. For the dawn is coming, and with it, the heat, the sweat, and all the unresolved hatreds that sleep so fitfully below deck. This moment of cosmic peace only serves to highlight the messy, violent, and deeply human drama that is about to reach its final act. The dawn doesn't bring salvation. It's just a celestial lamplighter, coming to illuminate the mess left over from the night. As the first pale rays of sun spill across the deck, they don't reveal a scene of fresh hope. They reveal the unvarnished, weary soul of the ship itself. It's a soul not made of ethereal light, but of splintered wood, stained canvas, and the collective, exhausted breath of the men who inhabit it. You've walked its decks, descended into its gut, and weathered its rages. Now you can finally see it for what it truly is. This was never just a vessel, a mere collection of wood and iron. You realize that now. You've been touring the anatomy of a living, breathing creature. The keel is its spine, the curved timbers its ribs, the towering masts the great bones of its limbs, forever reaching. The intricate rigging is its nervous system, trembling with every gust of wind, transmitting messages from the sails, its great, gasping lungs, down to the hands of the crew. Its cannons are its teeth, a promise of a savage bite. The galley is its grumbling, demanding stomach, and the captain's cabin is its troubled, scheming brain. And the crew? The crew is its lifeblood, a restless tide of humanity pumping through its arteries, carrying the oxygen of labor and the disease of discontent in equal measure. This creature is not beautiful. It is scarred, sick, and often monstrous. But it is, undeniably, alive. And like any living thing, it is the heart of its own unique, violent, and desperately codependent ecosystem. You've witnessed the entire food chain. You saw the men, the apex predators of this small world, who feed the ship with their sweat and blood, mending its wounds and guiding its path. In return, the ship feeds them with its foul water and weevil-infested biscuits, a grudging, almost resentful form of symbiosis. You've seen the parasites that thrive in its body, the rats scuttling in the bilge, the scurvy rotting the men from the inside out, the whispers of the lead mutineer, a parasitic idea feeding on the host's despair. And you've seen the external predators that hunt this beast, the fury of the storm, the patient threat of a naval warship on the horizon, the crushing, indifferent power of the ocean itself. Every single element, from the smallest barnacle on the hull to the grandest ambition in the captain's mind, is locked in a relentless, unforgiving dance of survival. So what, then, is the ship's soul? It is not a ghost haunting the timbers. It is the sum of all this chaos. It is the ghost of every hope that was ever brought aboard, and every dream that died in the surgeon's den. It is the echo of 1,000 drunken shanties, layered over the memory of 1,000 screams. The soul is in the deep, permanent stain of rum in the floorboards, in the metallic tang of old fear that never quite washes away, in the profound, bone-deep weariness of its every groan. It is a monument to a very specific and brutal kind of freedom, not the freedom to prosper, but the freedom to exist entirely on your own terms, even if those terms are squalor, starvation, and a violent end. It is a floating crucible where the basest and noblest parts of human nature, greed and loyalty, cowardice and incredible courage, are boiled down to their raw, potent essence. You came aboard this vessel seeking a story of adventure, of gold, of rebellion. But what you found is something far more profound. You found a living, breathing world, a floating testament to the desperate, ugly, and magnificent resilience of humanity. It is a place that is perpetually breaking and perpetually being remade, a cycle of suffering and survival that is as constant as the tides. The men will change, captains will be deposed, crews will be lost, new hands will be signed on, but the ship sails on. Its wood remembers the blood and the rum, the screams and the laughter. Its soul is not found in any one man or any single voyage, but in the eternal, violent, and desperate story it carries across the endless water. It is a story that never truly ends. It just finds a new crew to tell it. It is a structure born of legend, a colossal barrier of ice and magic, standing 700 feet high, stretching for 100 leagues from the mountains to the sea. It is the shield that guards the realms of men, manned by a sworn brotherhood, the last bastion against the darkness and the wild things that lurk beyond. It is the Wall. But this is not a story of fantasy, of ice and sorcery. This is a story of stone and steel, of sweat and blood. It is the story of a real wall, built at the very edge of the known world by an empire that believed it was the world. And the enemy it was designed to hold back was not an army of the dead, but something just as terrifying to the most powerful civilization on Earth: chaos itself. Before there was a wall, there was a problem: a cold, damp, and relentlessly hostile island named Britannia. For the Roman Empire, this place was the ultimate frontier. It was the final, hard-won prize at the northwestern fringe of their vast domain, and it was a prize that never stopped fighting back. To a soldier from the sun-drenched hills of Spain or the bustling streets of Syria, Britain was a green hell, a land of perpetual rain and mist, of dense forests that swallowed legions whole, and of bleak, windswept moorlands that seemed to stretch into infinity. This was not the civilized heart of the empire. This was terra incognita, a place where the maps ended and the myths began. The Romans had conquered Gaul, subjugated Egypt, and tamed the Germanic tribes along the Rhine. But Britain was different. It stubbornly refused to be broken. The source of this resistance dwelled in the unconquered north, in the rugged highlands of what would one day be called Scotland. The Romans called this land Caledonia, and its people were a warrior culture unlike any they had faced before. They were not a single, unified kingdom, but a shifting alliance of fierce, iron-willed tribes who valued freedom above all else. They were masters of their unforgiving terrain, appearing from the mists to strike with brutal efficiency before melting back into the hills. They did not fight in ordered lines like a proper army. They waged a war of ghosts and shadows, a relentless guerrilla campaign that bled the Roman garrisons one small cut at a time. The disciplined, heavily armored legionary, so effective on the open battlefields of Europe, was a lumbering giant in the bogs and forests of the north, an easy target for a swift and silent enemy who knew every inch of the land. For decades, Rome tried to subdue them, pushing ever northward. They built forts, they won battles, but they could never win the war. They could never break the spirit of the people who lived in the chaos beyond the fringe. This was more than just a military challenge. It was a bleeding wound in the side of the empire. The constant, low-level warfare was a catastrophic drain on resources, on gold, and most importantly, on men. The frontier was a place of fear, where entire patrols could vanish without a trace. Legends and rumors spread through the ranks, tales of the lost Ninth Legion, an entire force of nearly 5,000 of Rome's finest soldiers who had marched north into the Caledonian mists and had simply disappeared. Whether they were truly annihilated in a single cataclysmic battle, or were simply ground down over years of brutal attrition, the result was the same. The North was a graveyard for Roman ambition. The cost of holding this wild frontier was becoming greater than the value of the land itself. The greatest empire in history had finally found a line it could not cross with swords and spears alone. The old way, the Roman way of relentless conquest, had failed. A new, more audacious idea was needed. The choice was no longer between victory and defeat. It was between order and chaos. And as the 2nd century dawned, an emperor would arrive in Britain, ready to make that choice not with the sword, but with stone. Into this land of endless war and creeping despair stepped the most powerful man in the world. In the year 122 AD, the Emperor Publius Aelius Hadrianus arrived in Britannia. He was a stark contrast to his predecessor, Trajan, a man who had expanded the empire to its greatest ever extent. Where Trajan was the quintessential conqueror, Hadrian was a consolidator, an architect, a scholar, and a pragmatist. He was a man who had traveled to nearly every province of his vast domain, and he understood something that few in Rome were willing to admit. An empire that expands forever will eventually break under its own weight. He saw the bleeding wound of the British frontier not as a challenge to be met with more legions and more death, but as a problem to be solved with logic, engineering, and an act of unprecedented political will. Hadrian toured the northern frontier himself. He stood on the windswept hills, gazing into the gray mists of Caledonia. He spoke with his generals, he saw the fortified camps, and he felt the palpable tension of men living on a knife's edge. He understood that to continue pushing north was to pour gold and blood into an abyss. The old Roman dream of conquering the entire island was a fool's errand, a fantasy that was costing the empire dearly. And so, in a moment of stunning clarity, he conceived of a solution that was as radical as it was brilliant. If Rome could not conquer the chaos, it would contain it. It would build a wall. He would do what no emperor had dared to do before. He would declare that the age of infinite conquest was over, and the age of securing what was already won had begun. This was to be no mere timber palisade or hastily dug ditch. Hadrian's vision was for something far grander, a monumental statement of Roman permanence. His wall would be a scar of order carved across the face of the wilderness, a physical line that separated the imperium from the barbarian world. It would stretch from sea to sea, coast to coast, across the narrowest part of the island, a 73-mile-long declaration made of stone and turf. It was a project of staggering ambition, designed for a dual purpose. Militarily, it was a force multiplier. It would not be an impenetrable barrier, but a finely tuned instrument of control, funneling all traffic, both hostile and peaceful, through a series of heavily guarded gates. It would stop small-scale raids in their tracks and slow down any large-scale invasion, giving the Roman garrisons time to muster and respond. But its political and symbolic power was even greater. To the tribes of the north, the wall was an unambiguous message. This far and no further. It was the literal end of their world and the beginning of Rome's. To the citizens of the empire, from the farmers in Britain to the senators in Rome, it was a promise of security, a testament to an emperor who was building for eternity. It was a public relations masterpiece, a project that demonstrated Rome's power not through bloody conquest, but through the enduring might of its engineering. It was an admission of a limit, yet framed as an act of ultimate strength. The decision was made. The order was given. The emperor's will was absolute, but turning an imperial decree into a stone spine across 73 miles of hostile, rugged terrain was a challenge of a different magnitude. The vision was set, but the true test, the test of men and engineering against the wilderness itself, was about to begin. An emperor's decree is one thing. Remaking the very landscape of a nation is another entirely. The task of building Hadrian's Wall was a logistical and engineering feat, so immense it bordered on the impossible, a testament to the raw organizational power of the Roman war machine. This was not a project for civilian contractors or hired laborers. This was a military operation on a scale rarely seen, assigned to the very men who had fought and bled on this frontier. The legions of Britannia. 3 of them, the Legio II, Augusta, the Legio Stoics Victrix, and the Legio Vain Aboen Valeria Victrix, a combined force of over 15,000 of the empire's most disciplined and skilled soldier engineers, were tasked with turning the emperor's vision into solid reality. The first challenge was the sheer scale of the material. Surveyors, using simple instruments like the groma for laying right angles and the chorobates for leveling, meticulously plotted the wall's course across the rugged terrain. They chose a strategic line that capitalized on the natural defensive features of the land, most notably the formidable cliffs of the Wind Sill, a dramatic escarpment of hard volcanic rock that offered a natural advantage. Then the quarrying began. Legionaries, men trained for battle, put down their swords and picked up mallets and chisels. They became miners, blasting and cutting millions of cubic feet of stone from the surrounding hills. Each legion was assigned its own sector, and the work was a matter of professional pride, with masons often carving inscriptions into the stones they laid. The century of Gellius Philippus of the 2nd Legion, Augusta, made this, a permanent record of their toil, a signature of defiance against the wilderness. The logistics were a nightmare. Transporting these massive dressed stones across uneven hostile ground required Herculean effort, using heavy ox carts on purpose-built roads that had to be laid even before the foundation of the wall itself. The design was a marvel of military efficiency. The original plan called for a stone wall 10 Roman feet wide and perhaps as high as 20 feet, fronted by a deep, wide ditch known as the berm. The wall wasn't just a simple barrier, it was a sophisticated, integrated defensive system. Every Roman mile, a distance of about 1,620 yards, a small fortified gateway known as a mile castle was built. These were miniature forts, garrisoned by a few dozen men, capable of controlling passage through the wall. And between each pair of mile castles, 2 evenly spaced turrets were constructed, serving as observation posts and signal stations. A soldier standing on a turret could see the next turret in either direction, allowing for a message to be relayed down the line with astonishing speed using fire or smoke signals. An entire frontier could be put on high alert in a matter of minutes. This intricate network of stone and signals was to be the empire's new nervous system on the frontier. But as the work progressed, the plan evolved. The initial design was deemed insufficient. A second, even larger earthwork, the vallum, was excavated to the south of the wall, a massive, flat-bottomed ditch flanked by high mounds of earth. This wasn't for defense against the northern tribes. It was to create a strictly controlled military zone, a no-man's land separating the wall and its garrisons from the civilian province of Britannia to the south, preventing desertion and unauthorized contact. The project was a living thing, adapting and growing in complexity as it was being built. For a decade, the hills of northern Britain echoed with the clang of hammers on stone and the shouts of centurions. It was a slow, grueling, and dangerous war waged not against a human enemy, but against the land itself. The line was being drawn, stone by painstaking stone. But a wall, no matter how great, is only as strong as the men who stand upon it. And the story of those men was just beginning to be written. The wall was built by legions, but it was not manned by them. The elite, Italian-born legionaries, who had done the heavy construction, were soldiers of conquest and mobile warfare. Patrolling a cold, static frontier for a lifetime was not their purpose. That duty fell to a different kind of soldier, the forgotten backbone of the Roman army, the auxilia. These were men recruited from the conquered provinces of the empire, men who were not Roman citizens, but who served in the hope of one day earning that right for themselves and their descendants. They were the real Night's Watch, a brotherhood of outsiders, bound not by a mythical vow, but by the harsh reality of their shared duty at the end of the world. Imagine being a young man from the sun-baked plains of Syria, a skilled archer, suddenly posted to a fort on the British frontier. The sky is a perpetual sheet of gray, and a damp, bone-aching cold seeps into everything. The language of the locals is incomprehensible, the food is strange, and the enemy is an unseen presence in the mists. This was the life of an auxiliary soldier on Hadrian's Wall. They came from all corners of the known world, tungsten-clad heavy cavalry from Gaul, fierce infantrymen from the mountains of Thrace, slingers from the Balearic Islands, and even a cohort of boatmen from the wetlands of what is now the Netherlands. Their forts, like Housesteads or Vindolanda, were small, multicultural bubbles of Roman civilization set against a backdrop of alien wilderness. Here, men who would have been enemies just a generation before now stood shoulder to shoulder, their survival depending entirely on the man next to them. Their lives were a monotonous cycle of duty and discipline, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. Days were spent on patrol, marching along the stone walkway of the wall, eyes constantly scanning the bleak northern horizon. They drilled relentlessly in the muddy parade grounds of their forts, maintained their gear, stood guard duty in the turrets, and managed the flow of traffic through the gates. They were policemen and soldiers, customs officials and sentinels. Their world was small and tightly controlled, governed by the blast of the trumpet that signaled the changing of the watch. Yet, in the quiet moments, they were simply men, far from home. Archaeologists at Vindolanda have unearthed a treasure trove of their personal letters, written on thin wooden tablets. They are not grand reports of battles, but intimate snapshots of daily life. A soldier named Maskless, writing to his commander to request more beer for his outpost. Another man inviting a friend to his birthday party. A wife writing to her husband about sending him socks and underwear to fend off the bitter cold. These small, human artifacts bridge the gap of 2 millennia, reminding us that these watchers on the wall were not stone-faced automatons, but real people with families, fears, and the universal desire for a little warmth and companionship in a cold, lonely place. This was not a glorious posting. It was a 25-year commitment to a life of hardship on a dangerous frontier. The threat of a raid was constant. The weather was a relentless enemy in itself. Boredom and isolation were a cancer in the garrisons. Yet these men held the line. They were the living mortar that bound the stones of the wall together. They married local British women, raising families in the small villages, or vici, that sprouted in the shadow of the forts. They created a unique, hybrid frontier culture, a blend of Roman military order and native British resilience. They were the true guardians of the frontier, the forgotten heroes whose steadfast presence for centuries was the real triumph of Hadrian's grand design. Their watch was long, and their reward was small, but for a time, their vigilance held the chaos at bay and allowed a strange kind of peace to bloom in the most unlikely of places. For a century and a half after its completion, Hadrian's Wall worked. The grand, audacious experiment in static defense proved to be a resounding success. The chaos of the north was not eliminated, but it was managed. The wall became the single, undeniable fact of life in northern Britain. The endless, bleeding ulcer of guerrilla warfare was cauterized. The constant, small-scale raids that had plagued the frontier for decades were now easily repulsed by the vigilant patrols and the interlocking system of forts and turrets. The wall acted as a formidable deterrent, forcing any potential adversary to reconsider the cost of an attack. It stood as a silent, stone sentinel, a symbol of Roman resolve that was impossible to ignore. In the shadow of this newfound security, a unique and vibrant society began to flourish. The Vici, the civilian settlements that huddled outside the fort gates, grew from ramshackle collections of huts into bustling towns. They were melting pots, home to the soldiers' families, to merchants, craftsmen, tavern keepers, and entertainers from across the empire, all drawn to the frontier by the promise of commerce with the garrisons. A Roman-British culture was born here, in the cold north. Latin mixed with Brythonic dialects. Roman gods were worshipped alongside local deities. The wall, once a symbol of division, had ironically become a catalyst for connection, a place of exchange. Trade, both legal and illicit, flowed through its gates. The tribes to the north, while still independent and often hostile, also became trading partners, exchanging hides, cattle, and grain for Roman wine, pottery, and metalwork. The frontier, once a line of pure conflict, had transformed into a complex, semi-permeable membrane of economic and cultural exchange. This was the wall's golden age, the fulfillment of Hadrian's vision of a stable, prosperous, and defined border. But this peace, this hard-won order, was tragically fragile. It was a small island of stability in an increasingly turbulent sea. Far away, in the heart of the empire, the seeds of its own decline were beginning to sprout. A series of weak and corrupt emperors, endless civil wars, and a debased economy began to rot the foundations of Roman power. The pressure on the frontiers was growing everywhere, not just in Britain. Germanic tribes were massing along the Rhine and the Danube. The Persian Empire was resurgent in the east. The resources of the state, both in manpower and money, were stretched to their breaking point. The garrisons on the wall, once fully manned and supplied, began to feel the strain. Reinforcements became scarce, pay was often late, and the high-quality equipment they once relied on became harder to procure. The tribes to the north sensed this weakness. The pressure on the wall, which had been manageable for generations, began to intensify. In the late 2nd century, and again in the 3rd, massive waves of coordinated attacks, sometimes called the Barbarian Conspiracy, breached the wall in multiple places. The forts were burned, the garrisons were overwhelmed, and for a time the frontier collapsed back into bloodshed and chaos. The wall was always repaired, the line always re-established, but each time the effort was greater and the resulting peace more tenuous. The system was still working, but the cracks were beginning to show. The wall stood strong, a testament to the genius of its design. But it was becoming clear that its fate was not tied to the strength of its stones, but to the fading strength of the distant empire that had given it life. The long, slow twilight was beginning to fall. The end did not come with a single, cataclysmic battle. There was no final, heroic last stand at the gates. No climactic siege that broke the wall for good. Instead, the end came as a slow, agonizing withdrawal, a quiet fading of the light. It was the death of a world, happening not with a bang but with a whimper. By the late 4th and early 5th centuries, the Roman Empire was in a state of terminal decline. It was an empire besieged from all sides, and more critically, it was an empire consuming itself from within. Usurpers and would-be emperors constantly rose from the provinces, taking their legions with them to march on Rome and stake their claim to a crumbling throne. And Britain, a province rich in manpower, was a frequent recruiting ground for these ambitions. Time and again, a general in Britain would be declared emperor by his troops. Men like Magnus Maximus in 383 AD stripped the frontier of its best soldiers, taking them across the Channel for a gamble at imperial power. These men never returned. The garrisons on the wall, already stretched thin, were hollowed out. Cohorts that once numbered 500 men were reduced to a few hundred, and then perhaps to a few dozen. The sophisticated, integrated defensive system designed by Hadrian began to break down. Turrets were left unmanned, mile castles were abandoned, and entire sections of the wall fell silent for the first time in 3 centuries. The chain of signals that could once alert the entire frontier in minutes was now broken. The wall was becoming a hollow shell, a monument to a power that no longer existed. The final decisive moment came around the year 410 AD. The heart of the empire itself was under direct threat. The Goths were at the gates of Rome, and every available soldier was needed to defend the homeland. The remaining Roman administrators and the last remnants of the mobile field army were recalled from Britain. A letter, known as the Rescript of Honorius, was sent to the civilian leaders of Britannia. Its message was simple and devastating. You are on your own. For the Roman British people who had lived for generations under the protection of the eagle, this was an unimaginable act of abandonment. The umbilical cord that had supplied them with law, order, and security for nearly 400 years had been severed. The emperor had left, and he was not coming back. On the northern frontier, the last of the auxiliary soldiers simply faded away. With no pay, no supplies, and no chain of command, the garrisons dissolved. Some men, whose families had lived in the Vichy for generations, likely stayed, becoming local warlords or simple farmers, their Roman past a distant memory. Others may have tried to make their way back to their ancestral homelands across a chaotic and collapsing Europe. The great stone forts, once bustling with life, fell silent. The gates of the mile castles, once heavily guarded, now swung open in the wind. The wall, a project that had consumed the labor of thousands and stood as the ultimate symbol of Roman permanence, was now just a line of stones. The order it had maintained for 3 centuries evaporated, and the chaos it had been built to contain swept back over the land. The watch had ended. The eagles had flown south, never to return. The garrisons had vanished. In the years and centuries that followed the Roman departure, the Great Wall entered a long, silent twilight. It ceased to be a frontier and became something else entirely. A landmark, a memory, and a quarry. For the people of the Dark Ages who lived in its shadow, it was a source of endless wonder and superstition. They could not imagine the society capable of building such a thing, and so they attributed it to giants or wizards. It was a relic from a lost world of impossible power. Local lords and farmers, practical as ever, saw it not as a monument, but as a convenient source of pre-cut stone. They dismantled sections of the wall, mile castle by mile castle, to build their churches, their farmhouses, and their castles, carrying the legacy of Rome into the very fabric of their new world. Slowly, the wall was absorbed by the landscape. Soil and turf covered its foundations, moss and ivy clung to its stones, and in many places it seemed to disappear entirely, becoming just a faint, linear mound in a farmer's field. It was no longer a barrier, but a guide. A new border, the one between England and Scotland, would eventually be drawn near its path, and the old Roman military road that ran alongside it became a vital artery for shepherds, soldiers, and travelers for the next 1,000 years. The wall was physically gone in many places, but its ghost remained, a permanent feature etched into the geography and the soul of the North. It haunted the landscape, a silent reminder of a forgotten empire. It wasn't until the 18th and 19th centuries that scholars and antiquarians began to look at the wall with new eyes, not as a ruin, but as a key to the past. Archaeologists began to excavate the forts, uncovering the buried lives of the men who had served there. They unearthed the letters from Vindolanda, the altars to forgotten gods, the worn leather shoes, and the children's toys. The wall began to speak again, telling its story not of emperors and empires, but of ordinary people living extraordinary lives at the edge of the world. It was reborn, this time as a protected monument, a treasure of human history. And then, its story took one final spectacular turn. A young boy growing up in England, fascinated by the stark romantic beauty of the ruins, would one day visit the wall. He would stand on the precipice of the windsill, gaze out at the wild lands to the north, and feel the profound sense of an ending, the edge of a civilization staring into an unknown wilderness. That feeling, that powerful image of a shield against the darkness, would plant a seed in his imagination. Years later, that boy, J.R.R. Tolkien, and another author who followed in his footsteps, George R.R. Martin, would channel that memory into their own epic mythologies, The stone and turf of Hadrian's Wall became the ice and magic of fiction, its story of duty and decline echoing into one of the most famous fantasy tales of our time. The Wall, a failed project in the end, abandoned by the empire that built it, achieved a kind of immortality its creators could never have envisioned. It outlived the empire. It outlived the gods it was built to honor, and it became what all great human endeavors hope to become: a legend,